Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, am I wrong in thinking that Joe Buck's most relatable human moment happened tonight on the Manning cast when he declared that he didn't actually know who the running back was for Buffalo?
Yeah, that was a great moment. His Twitter account for a long time had been actually crazy relatable and like weird because of how like the whole thing about Joe Buck and the reason that he was a bad broadcaster. I think he's actually a pretty good broadcaster now, but I think he was a bad broadcaster, and I think one of the reasons was because of how staid and like dry his personality was. And it was really surprising to see his Twitter account when he finally got one to be like fun, and like he like clapped back at people, and he was like sarcastic, and it was great. And so like that came through on the Manning cast. I was actually not surprised that he was an enormous amount of fun on the Manning cast.
Yeah, he used to just do voiceover stuff for people that would send in video to him on Twitter.
That was great.
Yeah, that was fun to watch. So him doing a play call on Monday Night Football and then saying whoever the hell that was when he got the carry.
Perfect. It was classic.
That was fantastic. All right, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well, or as well as you can be after that loss to the Lions. We will be talking about that. Also, we have a Steelers preview as well because we're doing a double episode. Steelers game on Thursday. Why would we put out a Steelers preview that night? So we have a Steelers preview coming on with an interview that Arif did earlier today and a mailbag as well. But before we start, just want to thank all of you for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like bonus material or would like access to things like the Zoom watch-along that we did this last weekend, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and head over there. We had a bunch of people in there. We played bingo. Dusty won because he rigged it. It was great. Here's the thing. Now, not only was the Lions score points in the final 2 minutes of the first half the free space, and it turned out to be true, and that literally was for everybody. The other one was that if a Norse Code host makes a pun during the broadcast, because I wasn't sure if you're going to be able to be on or not, so Dusty then declared that he had been a host. So as such, and then he made a pun and went, all right, bingo. Because nobody else had won yet. Because a bunch.
Oh my God. That's extremely Dusty. Actually.
That is extremely Dusty, and I was so proud at that. But yeah, we had a lot of fun out there. Thanks to everybody who came out and enjoyed it. If you enjoy this sort of stuff, head over to Patreon, patreon.com/NorseCode. For $3.50 a month, Tree Fitty helps keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. And we have a couple people to thank here as well. We want to thank David Paul for signing up. Thank you, David. Also, Chloe and Josh, who had a quick note, who said, short-time listener, but have immensely enjoyed the content and decided to help keep Nessie at bay. My wife is paying the benefit, and I pay for her health insurance. I think I'm still coming out ahead on this one.
Yeah, she knows, right?
Just the end of if you missed last episode, or if you didn't make it all the way to the end, make it to like the 3 minutes from the end mark and just go on and listen to just me lose my mind at Arif over the whole over what do you have to plug?
Telling the truth?
Yes. What do you have to plug, Arif? Well, let's tug on some heartstrings while we're at it. So yes, check that out if you would. Also, a very special thank you to James Kimmer. Thank you so much for subscribing over on Patreon. It is very much appreciated. Or if you'd like to go to paypal.me/NorseCode, you can donate there. That's more of a one-time donation. Or you can be like one of the many people this holiday season that has gone to norsecode.threadless.com and picked up Norse Code gear there, including the Arif outfit, the shirt, the Christmas socks, everything possible that we could put
Mask,
it on. Yep.
Sweater.
By the
hoodie.
way, did you get the items that are going to be given to your brother for Christmas in order to potentially give him a medical condition?
Yes. I am trying to determine whether or not I will be wearing the sweater at the time of the gift giving.
Could you have something over it, and then when he like opens the gift, you unzip
like Superman? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, perfect.
You unzip, and there it is, and it's just, you know, at that point, it does become an episode of the Twilight Zone. It'll be fantastic.
That's great. I like that.
I'll be disappointed if it doesn't make a Facebook post for him. So check all of that out. Again, really appreciate you guys listening to Norse Code. Tell your friends, tell whomever you'd like, listen to Norse Code. The team might be terrible this year, but at least the content's good. And people are apparently listening to the show and having to watch the games to keep up with how the show is. So we'll get into that in a bit. For right now, let's get right into it. We got a double episode, so no time to waste. The Lions review. Boy.
Yep.
We're not going to spend a ton of time on this because the biggest narratives out of this have been either Kirk Cousins' throws, the coaching, the 2-minute drill at the end of the first half.
The 2-minute drills.
Yeah, what the hell Cameron Dantzler was doing at the end of the game. How the dots made it look like it was a double pickoff when it wasn't.
That's right.
But
the dots betrayed us.
The dots betrayed us. But the thing I want to bring up is about Mike Zimmer. People are calling for his head on a spike, or at least firing him. And listening to the presser.
I like that by saying that you imply that actually wasn't a metaphor, and that people are going like Vlad on him.
People are doing
actually, no,
terrible
that's true.
things.
I saw a Reddit post where someone reposted. I'm just going to say it. Is someone reposted? Was it Mike Zimmer's daughter?
It was something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Mike Zimmer's daughter posted on Instagram that people were replying to pictures of her babies threatening her kids because of how Mike Zimmer coached a football game, which, like, I know our listeners are great. I'm sure like 0 people who listen to the show did that. But, you know, if you did, F yourself. What the hell? What is that? That's crazy.
But so
those are real people.
Yeah. As it turns out, these people are real. They do exist. They have feelings. They don't coach the team. And you can be upset at Zimmer all you want. Here's my question to you. As somebody who pays a lot of attention to the pressers and everything, the answers he gave after the game as to why the Vikings lost, to me, sounded like a man who had seen the writing on the wall.
Yeah, so when I listened back to the presser, because I wasn't in Detroit this week, so I wasn't there, but when I listened back to the presser, it sounded less like that. I think reading the text of the words, it feels a lot more like that. And there's something to that, because like what you choose to say matters. But you know, how he said it, it felt a little less like that. I still think there's an element to that there, where he's probably aware that like this might be it. Like, you know, obviously the Vikings could go undefeated and from here on out, and which would mean beating the Packers again, sweeping the Bears.
I was surprised you were able to say most of that without like laughing.
Right. I mean, well, okay, but here's the thing though. It's the Vikings, right? Like they're nuts, right? I mean, they walloped the Packers. Like I don't know what to tell you.
No, this is as chaotic neutral a team that has ever existed for the Minnesota. This is ridiculous. Like this, we are full blown 2010.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And so they could finish the rest of the season with wins and make the playoffs because of how bad. I mean, did you see the In the Hunt graphic? Every team was 5-7. It was brutal, right? And I think if the Vikings, I haven't played with the playoff machine this week because, like, why would I subject myself to that? But I think if the Vikings do win out, they've got a really good chance of making the playoffs still, which is like an indictment of the 7th seed existing.
Of so much, yes.
Yeah, of many things. Of the NFC, the 7th seed existing, the concept of sport. Yeah. So, you know, if they win out, which seems so unlikely at this point, but if they win out and make the playoffs, you still probably get the sense that that's it for Mike Zimmer. Kind of like how was it Munchak who got fired from the Titans after winning a playoff game, and you just like, and everyone just kind of agreed like, yeah, that was the right move, and it turned out to be the right move. Mike Vrabel's been doing a great job in Tennessee. So like, yeah, I don't know. it's tough to see a scenario aside from like an actual playoff run, which is just so outside the realm of possibility at this point. That yeah, that's probably it, and I think he knows it. But he probably also knows that there's like a path, right, to keeping his job.
He just has to go and just win the whole thing. Like, I mean, they're not going to fire him if he wins the Super Bowl, but you don't have the personnel.
We're just going to have to go out and win the whole thing, boys.
Yeah, exactly. It's the major league thing. Oh God, this is just.
Yeah, it very much felt like that. The way that so the quote, this is what the NFL is like. There's close games. I think a lot of people rightly got pretty upset at that. I guess he was just relaying what he said to the team, which I think is different than what he is telling fans as a communication. So from that perspective, with that recharacterization, I should say, I don't hate it that much. But man, does it? At least he's not talking about how we're a couple of plays away here and there to the fans. Like maybe he keeps on telling the teams, like, look, I know we're a good team. This is one of the better football teams I've been around. Change 3 plays and we're now one of the best teams in the NFC. That's fine to tell a team, right? Because your goal in coaching is to maximize wins, and if you can, improve morale or whatever. But selling something to the team you coach and selling something to fans and media, those are two different things. So, right now it does seem like we're probably in Zimmer has a red hot seat.
Yeah, I think we're one game away from a press conference where Ziggy Wolf has to come in and say that we have every belief in Mike Zimmer as our coach.
The dreaded vote of confidence.
We are like one ugly loss / win away, because you don't know with this team from the dreaded from that dreaded press conference, because these things, especially late season firings, have that sort of seasoning to them. They have that sort of path. And
if they wallop the Packers in this ugly, nobody really thinks it's justified game, which I mean is kind of close to what happened, but if they beat the Packers and everyone is like, yeah, they really shouldn't have, that was dumb. I mean, you hear the vote of confidence come out, you're like, yeah, okay, I think I see where this is going.
Yeah, it's not good. Let's get into the game. People are calling for Zimmer's head, and it's hard to argue with the defensive performance, and then you remember there's nobody on that defense of any real note anymore, and so you have to wonder why.
So if you take a look at some of the most injured defenses around the league, like Baltimore, San Francisco, who they just played, and there's a couple more. The Packers even. I would say that they are doing better in their absences than the Vikings are. So I think it is fair to note that the Vikings are shorthanded on defense, particularly for these last 2 games against the 49ers and the Lions. But I think it's useful context, but it's not exculpatory, right? You should do better. And what can you do about Cameron Dantzler just losing his head? How much of that is coaching? Maybe not a ton. But maybe you don't give up 20 points in the second quarter. That's nuts that happened. You don't, there's so much stuff about this game where you can get to a point where you can kind of grant some context, nuance, forgiveness for some elements or some factors that ended up being crucial points in the game. But you should always probably circle back to, but it should have never gotten to that point in the first place, right? The Lions are missing their top 2 receivers, and they're missing good interior offensive linemen, and they don't have a great. They've gone through a couple of corners. You heard the interview with the guest. I don't know that the Lions have any bigger or any worse injury problems than the Vikings, right? And they are a less talented team. The whole point of drafting Alexander Mattison in the 3rd round is that when Dalvin Cook goes down, your investment pays off. If you were at a point where you used that 3rd round pick on something else, that guy was gone, or if Alexander Mattison was gone and you were relying on Kenny Wangu, who still probably doesn't do a great job reading interior runs all that well, then, maybe you've got like a decent argument, right? But like, you've invested in these players in some ways, in significant ways. You made some gambles, like along the offensive line, which we can talk about in a second, the way that they constructed it for this game. That, are choices that you made that are representative of how you got there, right? So like, yeah, it's not necessarily the Vikings' fault that Dalvin Tomlinson didn't get vaccinated and therefore wasn't available for the game, right? But they put money in Sheldon Richardson, and I would say they maybe got their money's worth out of him over these past couple of games, but like that was their plan at defensive tackle, right? They decided to draft some developmental defensive ends in the draft in the fourth and fifth round, or the third and fifth round, or something like that, in Janarius Robinson and Patrick Jones. And now it's not their fault that Janarius Robinson was hurt, but Patrick Jones is extremely developmental because he played a different kind of defensive, option-oriented football in the ACC, and he's not ready to play, right? And so it's their fault that they only draft developmental defensive ends, so that when they late in the season or late in the offseason realize that they have to take a risky move and sign Everson Griffin, and he's not available for the very reason that, your risk analysis told you that this was risky. Again, no shade to him. It's not his fault. Then you're left without depth, right? Like, you knew that Danielle Hunter was in re-injury risk, maybe not for the specific reason he was injured, but that probability is added on to the probability involving his like vertebrae and back. And you don't invest in any starting quality or instant capable defensive end, or if Stephen Weatherly is that, trading him away, right? Those are choices that you made to get there. So we can talk about the injuries and how they impact the team. I don't think the Vikings are more injured than some of the most injured defenses across the league, and they seem to be doing better in some of these situations. So that is certainly a relevant piece of context for evaluating how Mike Zimmer got this team prepared for this game, but it is not like exculpatory, right? So yeah, I don't blame Mike Zimmer for whatever Cameron Dantzler was doing at the end of the game, which we'll talk about. But I do blame the front office and Mike Zimmer for allowing that play to matter in the first place.
Let's talk defense. I don't want to talk about the offense yet because I'm too depressed about it. Let's talk about defense and how they let Jared Goff, of all quarterbacks in the league, lead a game-winning drive to victory.
Well, yeah, so he had 3 drives in the final 2 minutes of halves, right? And if you take those 3 drives away, which like is relevant because it's part of the way that we talk about the Vikings' defensive performance. So if you take those 3 drives away, those final 2 minutes, Jared Goff is like a negative 0.34, something like that, expected points per drop back, which is worse than his. I've got the actual numbers in an article that I've already submitted that's going to be publishing tomorrow morning. So by the time most people will have listened to this, worse than his actual expected points per drop back in the NFL. And his expected points per drop back on average in the NFL is one of the worst, depending on how you look at it. I think if you eliminate garbage time and you look at Ben Baldwin's website, RBs Don't Matter, he's the worst in the NFL. If you take a look at it in total, he's like the third or second worst, depending on what your cutoff is. Like, he's just playing abysmally this year. And by expected points, or by adjusted net yards per attempt, or by any other number of quarterback metrics, including like QBR, which is highly correlated to expected points, he's just simply one of the worst in the NFL. And the Vikings made him look worse than that for the majority of the game. But in those 3 drives, his expected points spiked up to like plus 0.11, which is a fairly high level. It's not, elite, but it is well above quarterback average. Quarterback average is plus 0.02. And so he looked like a high level quarterback against the Vikings in just those 3 drives, when he hasn't really looked like that at all this season. Like, he had some moments in the Rams game, he had some moments in some other games, but for the most part, he did not look like that quarterback because he's not that quarterback, and the Vikings let him look like that quarterback. He led a 77-yard drive for a field goal, a 32-yard drive for a field goal, and that 32-yard drive was 26 seconds, right? And then he led a 1 minute and 50-second drive with no timeouts for 75 yards for the game-winning touchdown from the Minnesota 11, which they hurt themselves by getting that delay of game penalty. That, I wouldn't say that should have been it, but I mean, they put themselves in that position, and you think, I've seen the Vikings so many times push themselves back in the red zone from 3rd and 1 to 3rd and 6. I think that's exactly what it was, 3rd and 1 to 3rd and 6, or something like that, right? They move themselves back 5 yards, they move themselves back 10 yards. And then that's what they point to when they say, yeah, we have to fix our red zone issues, which the Vikings' offensive red zone issues are actually not that severe. But we have to fix our red zone issues. We can't keep taking those penalties. And it's true, you can't. The Vikings' penalty problem is pretty significant. But also, like, Jared Goff of all quarterbacks got out of them, right? Why can't you against a worse defense? Like, it's mind-boggling how you can point to how the penalties hurt you a lot, and then you find this like game-winning drive from like one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL this year, who hasn't won a game without Sean McVay except now, lead a 1 minute and 50-second drive for 75 yards without timeouts. Like, it's brutal. I broke down the totality of that drive for that article I mentioned. So that's what's going there. But, for the most part, the Vikings, when you play the 2-minute drill, you bias your defensive coverage to the sidelines for obvious reasons, right? Because they're going to throw to the sidelines because they want to stop the clock. And so you make sure that those throws are dangerous or risky or interceptable, or you make those throws fall incomplete, or you bait them to throw in the middle of the field, and then you tackle that guy in the middle of the field and make sure that the clock runs. TJ Hawkinson got a ball where when he received it, he was between the two hash marks, and he was able to run all the way to the sideline to stop the clock and gain yards at the same time. If you're not gonna just play your normal defense, then that's nuts to me that your normal defense is probably better for your 2-minute drill than the 2-minute defense, because if you can't tackle, if you can't close down those over the middle routes, if you can't prevent some of these sideline throws, like there were 3 sideline throws, I want to say, that allowed them to, at the sideline, catch the ball and then get out. If you can't do that with your sideline-oriented defense, then just play your normal defense, because this is clearly just not working. The Vikings couldn't get pressure. The one time in those 3 drives, the one time they blitzed, they nearly got an interception. Bashaud Breeland got his hand on the ball, and he dropped it. And that sucks. That would have won the game for the Vikings. But, I don't really want to go in on defensive backs for dropping picks. It's just like a lost opportunity as opposed to a mistake. Like, props for the defense, or props to you for even getting there in the first place. But it was a quarterback hit. It was, I believe, one of only 3 pressures that occurred in those 3 drives. And it was nearly a sack, and it was nearly an interception. And there's no other blitzes. In fact, they actually reduced the number of pass rushers. As that drive continues, they start with 4 pass rushers, 4 down linemen. Then I think around the 40 or something like that, they reduce it from 4 down linemen to 3 down linemen. And we asked Zimmer, like, hey, what do you do? I say we, I wasn't there. The media asked Zimmer, so why did you do that? Why did you only decide to rush with 3 at the end of the game? And he said something about, hindsight, maybe you would have done something different, and that's kind of how hindsight works. But he said, we weren't covering well, so I wanted to add another coverage player. And, intuitively, that kind of makes sense, but, no defense is going to cover very well if a quarterback has 6 seconds, right? And so you need to shorten his clock. The one time you did that, you nearly got the game-winning interception. So I don't know why you wouldn't keep trying to do that. Jared Goff is famously bad against pressure. Blitz versus non-blitz, he's, whatever. He's not uniquely bad against the blitz. But when that blitz comes home, which it did for the Vikings in this game at a 50% rate, he had a 50% pressure rate on blitzes. Then yeah, he's Jared Goff. He's not going to do a very good job. He's the same quarterback that, like Kirk Cousins, had a 4th down throwaway. These things happen, right? On 2nd down, that basically happened. They ran, I believe it was a tackle stunt, and just confused the offensive line up in front of them, and Jared Goff threw the ball away because of the messiness at his pocket, or in the pocket. So, yeah, I mean, the defense. I don't know. The defense just collapsed. I don't know what else to say. They didn't have their linebackers in there. That was clear. I think, I didn't take a look at anybody's PFF grades. I think Nick Vigil probably had a good game. The rest of the defense, maybe Sheldon Richardson and Armon Watts had a good game. After that, I know Blake Lynch got two of the Vikings 3 sacks or something like that. But I think like and he had a fumble recovery off of the weird fourth down sack that Jesus, the Lions wanted to lose just as much, right? Um, I would say that Blake Lynch and especially Troy Dye, but Blake Lynch as a scrimmage linebacker did not play all that well. Rashad Breeland made some critical mistakes. He also had some decent plays. Xavier Woods made some mistakes. He had some decent plays. But yeah, I mean, you didn't get any stopping power up front. You didn't get what you wanted out of the return of Dalvin Tomlinson. You get the return out of Sheldon Richardson. Mackenzie Alexander made some really critical mistakes. It was probably one of his worst games that I recall seeing recently. Yeah, I mean, Kenny Willekes' best play was whistle dead. So for the rest of the game, he wasn't actually doing all that much. Yeah, it was just a bad game from the defense. They got run over by the offensive line, by the Detroit offensive line. They couldn't find ways to stop Amon-Ra St. Brown, a fourth round rookie, who was like third on their depth chart to begin the season. Just bad.
This was bad. The other thing I wanted to mention, it statistically speaking, this was not a defense that rushed and caused any problems for Jared Goff. It was ridiculous. Like, this is a defense that is known for its blitzes. And this is not a team that blitzed Jared Goff all that often. It was just, I don't.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the case. It was kind of interesting. Luke Braun tweeted out that against bad quarterbacks, the Vikings don't blitz all that often, but they find ways to make games hard for good quarterbacks. Like against, and to validate what he was saying, against Justin Herbert, for example, the Vikings blitzed on 40% of dropbacks. I think more than they did any other game this year. If that's the case, if they're just choosing not to blitz against these subpar quarterbacks, I find it interesting because they treat rookie quarterbacks differently. They tend to blitz first and second year players quite a bit more. But if you're like a veteran who's not that good, they just kind of want to sit back and let them beat you. And it's like, I don't know, the one thing that, or I shouldn't say the one thing, one element that separates backup quarterbacks from starting quarterbacks tends to be their response to complexity, their response to disguise, their response to blitzes, the fact that they have to speed up their decision-making process. Because these backups are usually pretty smart and maybe don't have the physical capability with the arm, but also they don't tend to respond to information quickly. Like, kind of like how Christian Ponder is supposed to be the super smart quarterback, but on the field he looked lost, and it's because you have to respond quickly and instinctively to stuff. And like one of the things that separates some of these backups is that they can't do that. And so if you've got a bad quarterback that the team that signed him to like a multi-million-dollar contract had to offload along with first-round picks to get Matt Stafford, you should challenge him. You should make things difficult for him. Like the fact that Jared Goff's like two best, if you account for context anyway, two best games seem to be against the Vikings, one for the Rams, one for the Lions, is nuts. Like, it's inexcusable that even like left-handed that this defense beats you, or this offense beats you.
Well, should we talk about the offense? I don't know if there's much of an offense to talk about. Justin Jefferson got a whole bunch of yards, somehow ended up getting a touchdown out of it, and Adam Thielen got injured early. And I don't think anything else of real interest happened in the game other than maybe KJ Osborne.
Yeah, I thought KJ Osborne looked good. I liked that the offense stopped using the screens after a while. I think the first half they had 4 or 5 screens. One of them worked until they kept going to it, and it just stopped working after that, mostly tight end screens. But they had some wide receiver screens that weren't working. One of the wide receiver screens that didn't work ended up being an injury to Adam Thielen. I'm glad that they looked at that and then just decided to move away from it. That's great. But they didn't. I mean, you have a lead against the Lions. You might as well go for the jugular, right? You end up with a fumble at the top of the second quarter. You end up with what was it? I want to say a 4 and out the very next drive because you get the first down on first down, and then a 3 and out after that, I guess. So 4 and out. You had a failed go for it near the end of the game. That was a turnover on downs. You only get the ball twice in the third quarter. And while the Vikings were finally able to score, in kind of those final moments. Like one of them was like a 19-yard drive, which, you know, if you wanted to construct maybe the funniest rebuke to the Kirk Cousins game-winning drive narrative, I think it's a 19-yard drive where you recover the ball at the 19 and then mostly run it until the final play where you throw it for a touchdown, and then that's Kirk's game-winning drive, and that's how they beat the Lions. That would have been the funniest way to do it, but of course they pull ahead and then they fall behind. Um, the defense obviously was a much bigger issue than Kirk Cousins or the offense. I don't think Kirk Cousins played particularly well. I don't think he played, necessarily egregiously poorly, right? Like I thought the San Francisco game was worse. I think he's had other worse games this year, but you kind of want to come out of the first half with a touchdown. Like that's not a lot to ask, I think. Yeah, I mean there were ball security problems. I think he had a dropped pick to go along with the other turnover, which I think was the Charles Harris sack with Tyler Conklin in protection. Which, like, you don't want to blame Cousins too much for that kind of sack, but he also is known to fumble the ball a lot, and so you always kind of think about it when that happens. But yeah,
listen, in the watch along, everyone was losing their minds at the screens, and the fact that every pass seemed to be behind the line of scrimmage, and how it was never working.
Well, yeah, that was particularly true in the first half, and that's a baffling response to me because entering the game, the Lions had, I believe, the league worst defense against deep passes, like period, like in expected points and yards per attempt and whatever. Against passes that traveled 20 or more air yards down the field, I believe they had the league worst rate. And some of that's because they've had these weird injuries at pass rusher that have prevented them from getting pressure on some of these deep throws. Some of it's that they kind of didn't figure out what they wanted their secondary to look like, but whatever, right? They're the league worst defense against deep throws. And the Vikings chose not to throw it deep until I think late in the second quarter, and then a little bit in the third and fourth quarter. And then, of course, they started doing that. It started working. Like, you can imagine that. The screen, like, I don't know, like, when you've got like a defense that is worse at coverage than it is at tackling, and they're not like great tacklers or anything like that, I don't know why you would take the coverage element out of it and just force them to make tackles, right? Especially if they got rid of some of the players that were really poor tacklers. Like AJ Parker, for example, was not in the game, and he's probably kind of the guy you would target on a screen like that. Like, he's not a very good tackler, but he's not in the game, right? And so you don't have to worry about that corner. And so if they've got this other undrafted rookie, again, this is something that we talked about in the interview with Jeremy Reisman, that's playing really well. Why not like test him deep and see, why he was undrafted? And if he wins, he wins. But he wouldn't, right? Because the Vikings were able to, when they decided to go deep, actually do something about it. So I don't know how much of that, because I primarily watched the defensive drives from my article. I don't know how much of that is play calling. I know that there were some pretty bad offensive plays called, including the screens. But yeah, it was very weird that the Vikings started off this game against a historically bad deep ball defense by throwing screens. Like, what are you doing? Like, in order to win deep passes, you don't have to have the fastest players on your team. Like, of course, it helps to have a Deshaun Jackson or a Tyreek Hill. But some of the better deep ball receivers that the NFL has seen didn't run faster than a 4.3. I mean, Adam Thielen for a while was a really good deep ball receiver, and he ran a 4.45, right? Which is fast, but it's not a 4.3, right? Jefferson ran a 4.42. He's a great deep ball receiver. Stephon Diggs ran a 4.42. He's a great deep ball receiver. In order to win deep, you just have to be good at running deep routes. And so that stands in opposition to winning screen passes, where speed plays a really significant element in how successful you're going to be. You have to outrun tackling angles. You obviously have to have quickness. You have to have vision. There's other elements there, but speed moves up the priority list in terms of the ways that you'll be able to get those big gains or successful plays. Whereas in deep balls, you just have to have a guy who finds a way to get open on those deep passes, right? Like Alshon Jeffrey, I believe, ran a 4.5, and for a while he was pretty good at deep throws. And so I don't know why you wouldn't attempt to force the Lions to get you off of that game plan. Um, Weird to me that it took a halftime adjustment or a mid-game adjustment, I should say, to get out of that mindset, as opposed to this is our plan to start the game, make them be good at the thing that they've been bad at.
Well, let's talk about the strange new alignment of players along that offensive line, because this is something that looks like it changed on Saturday, and mixed results, I think, is the nicest thing anyone can say about it.
Yeah, so because they didn't have Christian Darrisaw, they moved Oli Udo to left tackle, kept Ezra Cleveland at left guard, um, moved Garrett Bradbury back into the lineup so they could move Mason Cole out to right guard, and then they kept Brown and Neal at right tackle. So they have two players from the previous game at the same position, right? Um, I don't get it. From my understanding, Rashad Hill is healthy. He's not good, but my understanding is he's healthy, right? Um, let me quickly check on that because I believe if he wasn't healthy, yeah, he's fine. He's fine. You've got Rashad Hill, you've got Blake Brandel, who is more a sixth offensive lineman for you, or whatever. But you've got a guy that's playing on the left side. Like when you talk to offensive line coaches or some of these offensive linemen that are just readily available on Twitter to talk about this sort of stuff, they'll very often tell you, more often than not. Yeah, I found it to be universal. I'm just kind of using language here that some probably disagree. I just haven't found them yet. That switching sides from left to right is more difficult than switching positions from guard to tackle because of left-sided, right-sided footwork and how you have to mirror your body, and that's actually a very difficult thing to do. And so, some of the habits that you might get into just in your day-to-day life, where you use your right hand more often than your left, or vice versa, if you force yourself to do it the other way, sometimes it doesn't work because of the way being left-handed or being right-handed works. But some of it because you're not used to doing it, and so it becomes awkward. And Oli Udo has been training at right tackle for the Vikings his entire career, and then got moved to right guard. And I believe he played right tackle for Elon as well. And so in college he was right tackle. So he's been a right tackle basically his entire life, and they move him to left tackle in order to deal with that. They already have a guy who's played left tackle at left guard in Ezra Cleveland. And though, yeah, he had a good game against San Francisco at left guard, you're not screwing up his development by kicking him out for one game at left tackle and having Mason Cole play left guard because he's played left guard before, and switching from center to one side. I mean, they would have to make that choice anyway, right guard versus left guard. And the snap hand matters here. Like it's probably a little bit easier to move to right guard from center than left guard, but the difference is not nearly as dramatic. And so they could have moved Mason Cole to left guard and had Bradbury at center, and then have Oli Udo and Brown and Neal play on the right side where they're used to playing. But instead, they had Oli Udo play tackle. One, Wyatt Davis must be terrible right now. Two, very weird that Rashad Hill was like starting the year, but he can't be a substitute tech. Like, did I miss something? I don't know why Rashad Hill is not the tackle option here.
It's weird. I don't like it. I don't think that it makes any sense. And clearly the results spoke for themselves. This was Cousins in trouble a lot. And it didn't lead to Madison being able to be successful either.
No. The Vikings running game was like pretty pathetic. I'm going to just pull up the stats real quick. So on offense, Alexander Madison averaged 4.1 yards a carry with a long gain of 11 yards. And that is tempered by the fact that I believe his expected points is actually a little bit worse because of the way expected points works as accounts for like down and distance. Like getting 4 yards on 2nd and 10 is like bad. Like it's like not a win for the offense. And so from an expected points perspective, I'm pulling it up right now. The Vikings run game looked even worse, minus 0.12 expected points per play. a decent-ish success rate, but some pretty big negative plays running the ball. And I think a lot of that has more to do with the offensive line than it does with Madison, who I think suffers from like problems like making decisions quickly and having a tendency to just kind of bounce runs if things aren't there right away, which is kind of the opposite of what you want in a power back, which in Madison seems to be kind of fulfilling in his role. But yeah, you just did not get good run blocking from the Vikings offensive line. Like I think we probably saw some decent run blocking somewhere in the interior, but I think for the most part, most of the players were not providing really good run blocking. Like I think Brian O'Neill had a disappointing game as a run blocker. I think the tight ends, just I don't think a single tight end was blocking very well at all. I think CJ Ham made some mistakes, unfortunately, as a run blocker. And at least like I think there was like one interior guy that was doing a pretty decent job, but I think for the most part the interior struggled as well. And so you just don't have the run blocking there to like be effective on a consistent down to down basis. So yeah, there wasn't like much there in the run game that puts a lot on Cousins. If I'm going to take a look at Cousins' pressure rate, which actually this allows me to actually take a look at what his PFF grade was. It was surprisingly a decent PFF grade. I don't agree with that. But he's under pressure, looks like 26% of the time, so I guess not as much as you would expect. But probably his time to throw was probably pretty quick on, he had a 2.4 time to throw on clean throws. So he's getting rid of the ball quickly on these unpressured throws, which I'm sure plays just as much of a role in the depth of target and then also in how often his pressure rate appears. He was in a clean pocket when he threw that dropped interception, it looks like. So, the offensive line limited the offense, not necessarily by allowing pressure, but by forcing the Vikings to get rid of the ball a little bit quicker than they normally would have. So, a pretty poor performance from that offensive line. And I think a lot of that has to do, obviously, with the talent that they have, but with the weird decision the Vikings made to shuffle people around.
Well, should we talk about that last play?
Christ, yeah, okay, sure.
Let's just rip the Band-Aid off. What the hell was Cameron Dantzler doing? And Xavier Woods looked like he was either late or in the wrong spot.
So there is a replay after the play occurs, which I understand why Vikings fans would turn the TV off. But after a lot of the celebration is occurring, after the cameras pan to the celebration, they finally play a replay from the end zone angle, and you can see Xavier Woods. And his eyes are on the number 2 receiver, which is Khalif Raymond. So he's the second slot receiver. So he's the second from the outside. The number 1 receiver is the guy who caught the ball, Amon-Ra St. Brown. The number 2 receiver is the outside slot. And then the number 3 receiver is the inside slot, which I believe was TJ Hawkinson. So Xavier Woods' eyes are on Khalif Raymond basically the whole time, and he's late to turn his eyes out. And I don't know if that's an assignment or if that's a mistake that he made. So I was trying to figure out what Cameron Dantzler was doing, because it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But my first thought is, what is happening if Dantzler is correct? What if Dantzler's correct? What needs to happen elsewhere for that play call to be in such a place where Dantzler is doing the right thing and still allowing that touchdown? And Dantzler turns his hips out and up. And that's so important. That's called opening the gate as a corner. And that's typically a bad thing in like man-to-man coverage, but it's not something that matters as much if you're bailing to a deep zone. That's exactly what you need to do. So he turns his hips out and up. He's crossing his feet, and he's getting, it looks like, deep to the corner, but like not with any real sense of urgency. So I don't really know, even if he's right, if he's doing this correctly. But if that's his assignment, then somebody needs to take Amon-Ra St. Brown. And the problem with Dantzler's technique, which looks lazy because it's kind of slow, is that if Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to the outside, he's got a leverage advantage now, even though from an alignment perspective, Dantzler's on the outside of St. Brown, right? And so on outside throws, Dantzler should have the advantage. But because his hips are turned, he doesn't have eyes on a guy cutting underneath him to the outside, and he doesn't have leverage there. And he really only has a good opportunity to beat St. Brown, on a fade route to the corner of the end zone. That's really the only thing he does. So if that's his assignment, to prevent that fade route, then what needs to happen for the rest of the defense is that Alexander either needs to pass Khalif Raymond off to the pair of safeties, because you've got Harrison Smith up there, you've got Xavier Woods up there, and Smith looks like he's about to try and figure out between Hawkinson and Raymond which one he wants to kind of bracket or be over. Either you need to pass that guy off and immediately buzz to underneath St. Brown, or Xavier Woods has to exchange zones with Dantzler and take that underneath zone. So one of them has to replace what Dantzler is doing if Dantzler is doing the right thing. The other option, of course, is that Dantzler is wrong, which I think is a fairly sympathetic interpretation as well. If you take a look at what Bashaud Breeland is doing on the other side of the field, so he's got the other receiver whose name is it's Josh Reynolds, yeah, and Josh Reynolds is being bracketed by him and Cameron Bynum because the Vikings have 3 safeties on the field. They took a defensive lineman off to put a safety on the field, and he's playing what's called the shuffle technique. So the shuffle technique is a defensive back technique that was actually pioneered by Nick Saban when he was at the Cleveland Browns, because they acquired a cornerback like Wells or something, who was among the league leaders in interceptions, but ran real slow, like a 4.8. And he was near the end of his career, and they needed to do something to take advantage, kind of like Patrick Peterson, actually, take advantage of how smart he was, how short area quick he was, but got rid of the problems with his speed. And so Nick Saban coached not to backpedal, but to shuffle. And that keeps their hips kind of either parallel to the sideline or a little bit more often closer to a 45-degree angle towards the quarterback. And they slide their feet as they face the quarterback. They slide their feet as they cover that corner until it's time to turn and run. And so they go from heel to toe, and they always have a foot on the ground, and they're moving as opposed to backpedaling, and it allows them to move faster than if they're in a backpedal. They keep a peripheral eye on the receiver that they're covering, and if the receiver goes deep, they have a better angle to turn and run, because if you're backpedaling, you have to turn 180 degrees. If you're in the shuffle or slide technique, you have to turn fewer degrees. It's easier for you and your hips. And so you can run deep. And then also, you've got an advantage on short in-breaking routes because you can just drive. You're already in a position to drive. The only problem is if you don't have good leverage on the outside, a receiver can break inside and then cut across your face and go back deep outside, and then you have to turn your hips like 270 degrees or whatever, right? You don't have very good leverage in dealing with that. So there's some disadvantages to it, but the shuffle technique has been taught by Nick Saban at Alabama now for a long time. He doesn't have his defensive backs backpedal very often, and in fact, sometimes Alabama defensive backs will show up to training camp, and there's this story every so often like, hey, Drake Kirkpatrick doesn't know how to backpedal. And it's like, at Alabama? Yeah, they don't teach it. Breeland is using shuffle technique. He's sliding his feet from heel to toe and moving and gaining depth against that receiver, against Josh Reynolds, while maintaining eye contact with the play ahead of him, when the quarterback has the ball, maintaining an awareness of what's happening with the receiver, maintaining an outside leverage so he doesn't get cut back on, and taking advantage of Cameron Bynum's inside help there. So you've got a bracket over those two. Now, the two linebackers are taking on TJ Hawkinson. So you've got basically 8 coverage defenders and 4 receivers, because the running back is in to pass protect. So they've got 6 pass protectors against 3 pass rushers, which, unsurprisingly, they don't get pressure. And that looks like what Dantzler should have been doing, because as soon as he turns his hips out, even if he sees the ball, and it's going to be harder for him to see the ball with the way his head is turned, even if he sees the ball coming, it's going to take him longer to react and then longer to get to where that player is, which is exactly what happened. And maybe kind of the most embarrassing thing, let's see if I can pull up the exact quote, is what Amon-Ra St. Brown said after the game, because he was shocked, right, the way that the Vikings were playing the goal line. So what he said, he also just called Pro Football Talk and said the same thing. I was really shocked, actually, Sam Brown told PFT. The corner, I think he went like 4 or 5 yards deep in the end zone. It was perfect. I was running at him, and he actually just stayed there. He didn't even come up. In my head, I was like, this is the perfect situation. As I broke in, there was no one in front of me. It just worked out perfect for us. Indeed, it did. And then he continued. That's one of our 2-minute end of game situations. It's not too crazy of a play concept. When we call this play at the end of the game, it's basically to get 1 or 2 yards into the end zone. So when I catch it, I'm in the end zone. In his post game quotes to Lions reporters, like I think Benjamin Rabid and M Lion at M Live, Dave Burkett at Detroit Free Press, they quoted him as saying, it doesn't matter. I just need, and I'm paraphrasing now, I just need a yard, 3 yards, or a centimeter. Either way, I'm in the end zone. And like, yeah. So why is everybody gaining depth? Like the issue, like a lot of people said, I can't believe the Vikings played off coverage. I don't have a problem with them playing off coverage in that specific situation. The issue is that they kept gaining depth in off coverage. Like the concern, if you're playing press coverage, is that you get beaten off the line and now you have to chase and you don't have time for makeup speed because the ball gets out right away and the guy only has to get a centimeter inside the goal line. So the press coverage can create that risk. If you're in off coverage, you always got eyes on that corner. You just can't continue to gain depth. Like as that guy is running at you and eating up cushion, you challenge him. And if Mackensie Alexander was playing correctly, and he might have been playing correctly. He's got Kalif Raymond. So if Dantzler is wrong and Alexander is right about what their coverage is, Alexander did the right thing and just stood there. And Kalif Raymond ran into him. And he wasn't open. And that's all that matters, right? Like Alexander took the charge, basically. And Dantzler didn't, I guess. Like, it's just kind of wild. Like, the fact that the opposing receiver was like, what is he doing? I'm going to score here. Does he not know how touchdowns work? Like, that's damning. That is truly damning. Like, that's not even a situational awareness thing. Like, I'll knock Kirk Cousins for not understanding the trade-off between time and yards, right? Like, if you take, in a 2-minute drill, if you take 3 yards over the middle and run 6 seconds off the clock when you've got 30 seconds left and 60 yards to drive, that's a bad trade-off for you. I'll knock him for that, but that's a situational awareness thing because in the first quarter, that's a fine play, on like 1st and 10, right? You don't see anyone open, so you just drop it over the middle, you gain 3 yards, you take 6 seconds off the clock. Now it's 2nd and 7, right? Fine. So that's just situational awareness. This is not like knowing the rules of football. Like, I don't know how to put it. Like, okay, so here's the quote. It was actually crazy. I think he was like 3 or 4 yards deep into the end zone and shoot, I only need to get a yard or a centimeter in to score. So to see him so far off, I knew it was going to be a good play. I just didn't know what was inside of me. Like, come on. So yeah, I have no idea what Dantzler was doing. It could be the case that he was correct. Zimmer did mention that he should have expected some inside help. But for the most part, based off of what everyone else is doing, I don't think Dantzler played that correctly. And so I would argue that it is most likely that he was the one at fault for giving just acres of space to this guy. And like, I think I'm figuring out why Dantzler was like 4th string behind Chris Boyd at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Let's look at just as a brief overview. This was never a game that it seemed like the Vikings were going to end up winning, even when they had any form of lead. Even when they were winning, even when they had, had 2 field goals, which seemed odd against the Lions, but okay. To start the game, like, this never seemed like a game the Vikings were going to win. This seemed every bit of the play down to your opponent thing that the Vikings and to a greater extent Zimmer has been doing for his entire time in Minnesota. It's too bad. And it was incredibly frustrating to watch. And the fact that it was the Lions, and once again we were watching the final play, and it was an important final play. Like, the Lions are the perennial punching bag of the NFC, and rightfully so. But the fact that you got Mike Tice afterwards going off on Twitter about
he said it's the Lions. I've never lost to the Lions. Then I looked it up. He's never lost to the Lions.
No,
Even my sorry ass has never lost to the Lions, is what he said.
yeah, it's just
which is
like
incredible.
this.
Dude, the Lions have 7 playoff wins, period, in their franchise's history. That is 3 more than the Houston Texans, and the Lions have been around for 72 more years.
This one hurt. This one is gonna burn. If the memory of Kirk Cousins becomes, as you had said on the Lions podcast, a bit like a bit like a better version of Mark Sanchez when it comes to like our memory of Kirk Cousins being lining up under the guard instead of the center. Like, the memory of Zimmer at this point is not going to end up being the miracle. The memory of Zimmer ends up being the loss to the Lions for no good reason after playing them close twice.
Yeah. The Vikings split the Lions 1-1 in 2 close games, right? Because the Lions won by 2 in this game because they never bothered to line up for the extra point, which by rule they should have, which only matters for bettors. And would they beat the Lions by like 3 or something? Like,
This is a dumb one, and I cannot wait until Thursday to find out just what team shows up. And speaking of which, let's go to that right now. Let's be done with the Lions stuff. There's nothing really else to say other than everyone is still employed, and I have no reason to believe they will not be employed even if they lose against the Steelers in some horrific fashion. So let's go over to the Steelers preview that Arif taped earlier today with Alex Corsair of Steelers Depot, and we'll be back for the mailbag.
All right, I'm with Alex Corsair of Steelers Depot. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, much better after a win. It feels like forever since the last time Pittsburgh won. Hadn't won in 3 weeks, a tie against the Lions, and 2 losses, and Sunday was certainly an important victory for Pittsburgh.
Waiting for a win is such an interesting feeling for Steelers fans, right? I mean, there's been so much success for the Steelers for so long, but then, what was it, 2019, you saw some Big Ben injuries, and then I think from there it's been a little bit rocky.
Yeah, 2019 lost Ben, went 8-8 that season, went 8-5, and yeah, Steeler fans, myself included, are certainly spoiled by the era of this franchise quarterback, 2004, and this certainly looks like this will be Ben's final season. So you go into that big unknown, and hopefully it's not like in '83 when Bradshaw retired, and it took a long time to find your next franchise guy. But certainly losing is not something Pittsburgh's accustomed to, and so it was good to get a win, and then certainly a win against the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, definitely. At least against the Ravens for sure. Well, yeah, let's talk about Big Ben. Let's talk about the quarterback position. So Roethlisberger, I think, is near the bottom. I don't think he's the bottom, but he's near the bottom in average depth of target, which I think kind of matches the trend that we saw from last year, but certainly does not feel very Big Ben-ish. I mean, this sounds like a decision, or this sounds like an approach that Ben has made. This is not because this is the second offensive coordinator in 2 years. This is not an offensive design thing. Has Ben's arm just died? What's the kind of feeling behind the fact that it's no longer a deep ball offense?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's died. It's certainly it's certainly multiple rungs below where it used to be. I think there's always a component of quarterback and receiver. The Steelers attempt a lot of deep balls, even in years past. 2020, 2018, they were near the tops in football in deep ball attempts. But in terms of the efficiency, the effectiveness of those, they've been towards the bottom. And I think they certainly are missing one element of that, just like deep burner speed. When they had a Martavis Bryant or a Mike Wallace, or even early Ben Days, a Nate Washington kind of guy, they haven't had quite that true vertical threat. Chase Claypool's supposed to be that guy, hasn't always worked out that way. That's not to absolve or excuse Ben. His arm strength certainly is not what it was in those Wallace, Washington kind of days. And so you combine that with the lack of mobility that he has. He can't extend the play that he used to, and so his snap to throw times are consistently among the quickest in football, which of course lends itself to that low, average depth of target and things like that. So the offense has kind of been built on being more efficient. It's also been one part, especially last year, the lack of a run game. So the short pass game was the elongated run game because they could not run the football to save their life. And so they had to go short pass game, the one-step game, the three-step game, and things like that to kind of get some traction on first down. So I think there's it's probably more layers to it than what the national media understands. But certainly Ben's arm strength is not what it was, and I don't want to hide that fact either.
Is there something like physical in the component of, hey, we're so used to seeing these like insane pump fakes, but I think there's like one or two instances where his, talent for pump faking even the camera out turned into actually a fumble or an incomplete pass, something that like clearly had slipped out of his hand. Is that like is there a physical component to that?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I think he just gets really aggressive with the pump fakes. And most of the time, it's not even that he's like trying to fake a defender out. It's him just deciding not to throw at the very last second because the way the defender moves, the receiver doesn't break open or run the right route. So I think it has happened once or twice this season. And that's been surprising because he's normally been so good about pulling the ball down. But I don't know if there's a physical component. I mean, he had that elbow surgery, obviously, but it's supposed to make him better and stronger and all that. And I don't know if that's really happened or if that was just kind of them trying to rationalize and be optimistic about things. But he's still good at the pump fake, though. He certainly can fool guys because he is still a strong guy. He just has 85-year-old grandpa knees because he's 39 and played in football since '04, and the dude just can't really move. And so he's got to kind of pump and throw quick to overcome some of the lack of mobility limitations.
So what does his strength weakness profile look like, right? Like what has he struggled against? What kind of defenses has he done really well against this year? What does it look like for, a savvy defensive coordinator lining up to stop Big Ben?
Yeah, it's hard to confuse him with disguises and blitzes because he's really seen it all. I think he's always been, to me, a quarterback that does better against zone coverage than man coverage. The Steelers, when you talk about trends, and this has been across different OCs and players, they do not throw deep middle really at all. It's among the fewest in football. And so there's not a lot of seam throws. And so if you play probably a lot of too high, I think that kind of limits Ben because he loves the vertical shot against cover one. And so he can throw one-on-one on the outside to the sideline. So he does that more than almost any other quarterback in football. And so that's something I would probably take and try to take away and force the middle of the field type of throws. But from a strength standpoint, I think you have to appreciate just all the newness that's been around him. A new OC, new offensive line coach, new assistant offensive line coach, virtually a brand new offensive line, a new running back, a new starting tight end. There's a lot that's on his plate, and he's not been one that's dealt with a lot of change in his career. His OCs in the booth now used to always be on the field. And so I think he's handled that well about trying to bring these young guys along as his offense tries to find its identity. But bottom line on Ben, it's certainly going to be quick game. They run a lot of RPOs. They're a very heavy RPO based offense, and it feels like on every RPO it turns into a pass. So it's really not an option. It's just the illusion of the run. So it's quick game. And then I think it's hard to fool Ben because he has seen virtually everything in his career.
All right. So Dwayne Haskins not the quarterback of the future.
No, and neither is Mason Rudolph. I think the quarterback of the future for Pittsburgh's probably in college somewhere. They may go the veteran bridge option next year, a Mariota or something like that. So Rudolph will be back. Haskins probably back as well. He's an RFA, but no, those guys are not going to be the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and God help them if they are.
Fair enough. Well, let's talk quickly about the running game and specifically with the running backs. I know that when the Steelers selected a running back in the first round, I think given kind of the modern take nature of Twitter, this is fairly well criticized. A lot of people talk about how the running game is produced more from the offensive line than from the running back, but Najee Harris was the best running back prospect in that class, and it felt like he started off slow, but has really, I think maybe since, week 4 or something like that, has really kind of found his legs and has become, not just a big part of the offense, he always was, but an effective part of the offense. Do you feel like that is improvement driven by him, by the offensive line, but just by circumstance? What's going on?
I think it's a little of all the above, but I would primarily put it on the improvement of this offensive line. And it's still been rocky. This line has ebbed and flowed. But, I mean, again, the only returning starter from last year was right tackle Chukwuma Okorafor, and he technically didn't even start last season, went from week 2 for the rest of the way. And so they have a rookie left tackle, a rookie center, a left guard who was in his 3rd year, and then a new guy at right guard, Trey Turner, a veteran to the NFL, but unexpected sign this summer because David DeCastro's ankles unfortunately needed another surgery, and so he was released. And so when you have all those newness, and again, new offensive line coach, new assistant offensive line coach, there's a lot of pieces that have to come together. And it was really a big struggle the first 3 weeks. It got better in that middle portion. it's ebbed and flowed. They weren't as successful as they should have been against teams like the Bears and the Lions and the Chargers. Things were better in the second half against the Ravens last week, so there's some improvement there. But yeah, certainly Pittsburgh has that very old school mentality of that workhorse every down running back. They've been searching that for that since Le'Veon Bell. James Conner had the ability to be that guy, didn't have the health necessarily to be that guy. And so yeah, I know that pick was criticized a lot, but Pittsburgh is as anti-analytic as possible. You bring a calculator into that room, they'll throw you out. So they were very old school people, and that's why they took Najee Harris, who's played very well. I think he has improved, and he's a 3-down back, and he can block. His blocking has been excellent the last couple of weeks, and he can catch. And so it's not just the run component that's made him an asset to this offense. It's because he can do it all and do it at a high level with really impressive conditioning to be that workhorse back.
Let's throw the game with 20 targets out. He still has a fairly healthy amount of targets throughout the year. Was his receiving capability a surprise to you? I know a lot of people didn't really think of him as a back that could catch, that if he was going to be out there on third down, he was going to be a pass protector more than he was going to be, a potential target. But he's gotten, I think, at least 3 targets in every single game, and typically, quite a bit more. And then obviously he had 100-yard receiving game against Cincinnati. Was that a surprise to you, or was that kind of always there and it just kind of wasn't a big part of people's scouting reports just because Alabama didn't need it?
Mm-hmm. No, it's not a surprise to me. He caught 80 balls his last 2 years at Alabama. That was 5 less than Travis Etienne. So, he caught a lot of passes. He just kind of flew under the radar because of obviously what he did as a runner. So there's not much in the design pass game for Harris. The Pittsburgh's an abysmal screen team. They ran one earlier this year and it failed, and they refused to do it because
they ran one. Wow.
They ran one, and not trying that again for 3 more years. But it's a lot of checkdowns type stuff. And so when Harris plays, he's about 85% of the snaps, and so that's most in football. So that allows yourself to absorb a lot of checkdowns and dump offs and hot reads and stuff like that. But he was a really good receiver coming out of college, and that's again one of the things that really attracted Pittsburgh to him, was that well-rounded versatility. So yeah, he's going to set the Steelers' franchise record for most receptions by a rookie. He's like 8 away right now, and so he's going to do that probably in a couple of weeks. And so again, it's not a lot of design type stuff, but it is a lot of check down volume kind of stuff.
Yeah, especially in what is evidently a check down heavy offense. So
right, yeah, for sure.
So behind him, you got Benny Snell. You've also got Perpetual Project Kalen Ballage. You've got Anthony McFarland. What is kind of the character of these running backs?
They're really good friends with the bench because they don't play. They just don't rotate in. They get a couple of snaps. Snell's a really strong special teams guy, and I give him a lot of credit because he was big man on campus, like Kentucky, SEC record guy, all that kind of stuff. And he came in to really, carve out a role on special teams to be a core guy. And I think it's tough for some guys to buy into that because you go from being the best guy at your high school, the best guy at your college, help Kentucky become a football program. They beat Florida for the first time in like 30 years, and you're in the NFL, and you're just one of the guys, just one of many guys on that team. And so those guys don't play much. Anthony McFarland's second-year guy. He's dealt with injury. He's got some run capabilities, a fast guy, but just a struggle to get healthy and get active. And so really outside of special teams value and some minor power that Snell and Ballage has, there really isn't a ton to talk about with those guys. It is a Najee Harris show.
Should they transition Kalen Ballage to receiver?
Or to another profession, maybe. No, Ballage actually had some short yardage value with the many places he's been, the Jets and the Chargers. But he has not done a whole lot for this team, and so his value to this team, some special teams value, some third down ish type stuff, but it's pretty minimal.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that even the DFS nerds that love the sparked up running backs and stuff like that, we're just not crazy excited about coming out of Arizona State. So like when he gets there, it's just, I think, kind of a fascinating player to track. The fact that he's actually still in the league is beyond interesting to me. How often do they use a fullback? I know they've got one on the roster, Derek Watt. How often does he see the field?
Offensively, it's roughly 3 to 5 plays a game. It's situational. Obviously, you'll see it more goal to go, obviously, third and short type stuff. Occasionally, they come out heavy. They came out in the second half against the Ravens, and I think 21 or 22, and they ran, I think, a lead play to the left. And so occasionally, they'll do that type of stuff. But he's primarily here for being a special teams guy. He's a core four-face guy, leads the team in special teams tackles. And so that's really his number one role on this team. Offensively, roughly, let's call it 3 to 5 snaps a game.
All right, so going from positional value, first round pick, Najee Harris, second round pick, Pat Freiermuth at tight end. People don't really talk about positional value with second round picks, but I find it kind of interesting that the Steelers are kind of continuing a trend, a position that's like relatively less valued, and you end up with the tight end. There's only, I think, like 3 tight ends on the roster, so it's an area where they kind of expect Freiermuth to do a lot, and he has. I feel like not a lot of people have been talking about kind of the excellent season he's had for a rookie tight end, but also it's just kind of an interesting selection. I mean, he got overshadowed a little bit just by the fact that there was a Kyle Pitts in the draft, but also he's a tight end, man. Like Pittsburgh has not paid very much attention to positional value. I mean, what Edmonds, for example, a couple of years ago, linebacker pick. I mean, it just feels like this is not something that they pay particular attention to. Are they on track to already get their money's worth for what it's worth at tight end with the Freiermuth pick?
I would say so, Arif. I mean, this guy has the look of being a 10-year starter for this team. And I think his value to this team has become more important once Juju Smith-Schuster went down. That third down, got to have it. You're going to run the slant, going to run the option route type of moment. Juju was that guy and did that role very well. And so when he went down, he needed someone to fill those shoes. And so Benz immediately had a lot of trust in Freiermuth, who catches everything. This guy did not have a single drop in training camp. He's got maybe 2 drops that I've seen from him all season long, literally only 2. And so I think what's most impressive to me about that is what you mentioned, the fact that he's a rookie tight end. It's such a tough jump from college to the NFL. I think it's the toughest jump in football, only behind quarterback, of course. So to make that jump, and for him to only play 4 games last year, had shoulder surgery, a junior, so an underclassman coming out, and to look like he's been in the league for a couple years is really impressive. I think it's probably in part to how Penn State used him as more of an inline guy, not one of the big receiver college tight ends, but still really impressive. Usually you see the jump year 1 to year 2. Think about the Vikings, Kyle Rudolph, Irv Smith. Those guys really made that statistical jump in year 2. Freiermuth, you're seeing a big impact in year number 1. So he's got to get stronger as an inline blocker, but I think Harris and Freiermuth have been as advertised, and certainly guys who are going to be starters for the foreseeable future. And for Pittsburgh, you're right. Tight end value not thought of very highly, but Pittsburgh really has not invested in the position in the draft. Freiermuth was the first player in the top 4 rounds to be drafted by Pittsburgh as a tight end since 2007. So they just really had not invested in the position that much. Some late round guys, some free agents that typically did not work out, some trades. But I think it was good to get that guy that can be with this team for the long haul.
Yeah, I was definitely wrong on Freiermuth. I thought he was just a guy in the draft. He seems like he's doing quite a bit more than that. What's your take on the positional value bit when it comes to the way the Steelers have approached the draft? Do you think they're making a mistake here? Even though Najee Harris is good, even though Pat Freiermuth is good, do you think, like, at large, they're making a mistake?
Well, I have competing thoughts, because I think they've gotten really good players with Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth, and I think sometimes we get too wrapped up in positional value. We just forget about, did you hit on the player? It's better to take Najee Harris and Freiermuth than some cornerback that doesn't work out, that busts out or something like that. And we just focus on how hard it is to hit on draft picks. It's like 50-50 in those early rounds. And so just to get talent and guys that help you and guys that help you now, I think you don't want to understate that. But at the same time, I sit there and go, man, Creed Humphrey would look great in the Steelers uniform right now. And he had 2 chances to get him. He was my number 1 center. And so that guy's doing so well. So, would I take Humphrey over Freiermuth? If I could do it over, I would. And that's no slight against Freiermuth. I just think Humphrey's a plug and play center the way that he is for KC right now. So, but again, that goes back to Pittsburgh's very old school, non-analytical approach. I mean, they hemorrhage analytics people. They lose them consistently. Kareem Kasem, Kareem Kasem went to Duolingo. Like, that's where he took his job. He was like, I'm not going to work for the Steelers. I'm going to go work to teach kids how to learn Spanish. Like that was his career arc. They lost another guy in August this year to the Jets for a similar job. So, like, they're very anti-analytical.
Tomlin had that jab, right? He was like, they're predictable. The Ravens are predictable what they do because they're very analytics forward organization.
Yeah, the Ravens' failure there means that Tomlin will never use analytics ever again. He's like, I knew it. I knew it. Baltimore screwed that one up. That's what Harbaugh gets for all his math and numbers and nerdy stuff. So yeah, they are very from the gut people, and that makes them tough to predict sometimes. Also makes them predictable because they go with relationships. I mean, their first round picks have been guys that they're at their pro day for like the entirety of Tomlin's tenure. I think 2009 was the last time they drafted a first round pick who they did not personally see at a pro day, and so they are predictable in that sense because they really value the relationship and the eye and the tape test more than the number test.
Does that predictability? Let's just go off track for a second. Mm-hmm. GM's name, I think, was Kevin Colbert. I think
Yes.
is how you pronounce it. Yeah. Does that predictability lead to, I think, greater surprises, right? Because the Steelers, known for not trading up in the draft, and then a couple years ago they traded up in the draft, and everyone's like, "Oh my god, what have you done with the Steelers? What's going on?" Does that sometimes get you a little bit more, because the Vikings are like notoriously unpredictable in basically everything that they do. So anything that happens, I'm just like, yeah, okay, fine. That's the very Vikings thing.
Really?
They've never done it before, but whatever. Is that what happens with the Steelers, where they do something out of character and it just kind of feels a little shocking?
I think it can be, and it manifests itself in the decision making in game. Like, will Tomlin go for it on fourth down in one game? It's flip a coin, because it's just based off of his gut, based on how he thinks things are unfolding in the game. And so when they lost to the Bengals 41-10, they didn't go for it on fourth down once. I don't know how you lose by 31 and don't go for it on fourth down one time in that entire game, but that's just Tomlin's gut thing. Sometimes he'll be super aggressive. A couple of years ago, they were one of the league's most aggressive teams in 2-point conversions. That was
I remember that.
Super progressive kind of thing, and then they just haven't done it since. They just scrapped it. So it is hard to predict sometimes, because it is a very gut kind of feel, and so you're just with Tomlin, how he woke up that day and just feeling about the game and the way it's going can make that tough to track.
Let's go to the offensive line and then receivers. So we already talked a little bit about the offensive line, how new it is. So Dan Moore, another player that I think I was not very high on. You can tell me, how he's doing. Kendrick Green, I think a lot of Vikings fans were very interested in him. Of course, he played in the Midwest. He's a super athletic testing center / guard. I think he's playing center, right, for the Steelers.
Right.
And his preseason, I remember some kind of highlights floating around Twitter, which were not, great for him or anything like that. Any highlight of an offensive lineman is usually not good.
Mm-hmm.
How have those two rookies performed, knowing that they're third and fourth round rookies and not just quote unquote rookie offensive linemen, which typically come if they're starting in the first and second round?
Yeah, context is important, but sometimes it's not, because they're starters, and you just have to evaluate them. Because
they play against whoever they're up against. They're not graded on a curve.
Yeah, Myles Garrett didn't go, well, Dan Moore, your fourth round pick, so I'll take it easy on you. He whooped Dan Moore's butt, and Moore had just the worst performance possible, and just you knew it was going to happen, and so such is life. And so those guys have been very inconsistent. There's certainly athletic traits, there's physical traits. The Steelers' mantra under new offensive line coach Adrian Clem was, you want athletes, you want guys who are physical and kind of tough and play through the whistle. And Moore and Green are both of those guys, but they're rookies.
Yeah, Green is physical as hell. I don't know if he's strong in the same way that,
right.
But he's physical.
Yeah, he'll finish blocks for sure, but he'll be on the ground half the time as well, alongside the defensive linemen. So he's been very inconsistent. Even stuff like the Steelers haven't been able to run their gap scheme as effectively with pulling guards, because Green can't get the back block as often. He's just struggled with consistently being able to line up and take the angle to the target and be able to secure that backside block there. And Moore certainly had his issues as well. I think I have him down for 6-7 sacks allowed this season already, prior to yesterday's game. So yeah, those guys are young though, and hopefully you see growth in year two. But this O-line certainly has been inconsistent, and it ebbs and flows, and they've gotten better. And, it's not as bad as it was week one, but it certainly needs to be better and needs to continue to improve, because Pittsburgh, generally speaking, needs a competent and efficient and effective run game. Otherwise, its offense goes into a complete tank. They have to run the ball effectively 90% of the time for their offense to do much of anything, and that has been a struggle this season.
Well, and some additional context, Pittsburgh's one of the fastest time to throw teams in the league. So to give up 7 sacks thus far in a season within that offense, that's a lot.
Yeah, it is. I think the number gets skewed a bit because of all the RPO and the quick screen game stuff that they do. But you're right. Yeah, it is a lot of sacks. I think Villanueva last year, their left tackle, got allowed 2 the entire season. He had a much better season than Morris had. And Green, played, as you said, played guard at Illinois and didn't play a ton of center, and so that's new for him. Another underclassman. So those guys are battling, but certainly they've had their struggles.
And Okorafor, I remember back when I was doing league-wide stuff, Okorafor filling in, I think injury-wise you mentioned, had like 1 or 2 really impressive performances, but I feel like hasn't really followed up on his best performances back when he was an injury replacement as a starter. But it sounds like the way you're describing it is the most consistent player on the line right now.
I think that's a fair way to look at it, Arif. I think he's been average this year. The way that I look at Chukwuma Okorafor is that he would be the weak link on a good offensive line and the anchor on a bad offensive line. And so it's kind of more the latter for Okorafor this year, where he looks like the best guy, partially because the other guys are a bunch of rookies that are trying to figure stuff out. So Okorafor's been okay. Pass pro's been pretty good overall. I think I'm down for only 1 sack allowed this season. Run blocking is very average. His power is just not there. So he's not going to get a big push in the run game. He's a free agent after the season, so he's trying to work to get paid this offseason. So he's been, I think, average overall, but on this line, average is actually pretty good.
Yeah, so the Vikings don't have any edge defenders as far as I can tell. They've transitioned a defensive tackle to edge defender, and Sheldon Richardson, although of course he's played that in the past.
No replacement for Danielle Hunter. I mean, you just said just I guess it's a hard.
Yeah, 1 for 1. Yeah, you just put Sheldon Richardson and plop him. Same production.
Yeah, I bet. Not quite, I guess.
No, I think they've had like 3 guys play start at edge rusher this year, or play significant snaps at edge rusher that were on practice squads to begin the year. So a really cracking edge defense. It's Danielle Hunter gets injured. Everson Griffin has a mental health crisis. It's stuff you can't really control, but at the same time, you kind of wish you had a little bit more depth. I think there are 2 players went on injured reserve. Kenny Willekes had a COVID issue. So, it's these things kind of pop up, but it's still kind of obvious when it comes time to actually play football, kind of what the talent level is at edge defender. The Vikings had to play a bunch of backs to defensive tackle. They get both of them back, or they got both of them back last week with Tomlinson and Pierce. How do you, knowing that when you hear that, hey, they've got their run defensive tackles back, they don't really have a lot of pass rush up the middle necessarily, although the backups actually are not bad pass rushers at defensive tackle, and they're playing a defensive tackle at defensive end. They've got some backups playing defensive end. How do you approach that? How do you think somebody like Mike Zimmer would kind of use those players to take advantage of what Pittsburgh does poorly? How do you think about the way that offensive line, as you described it to me, would do against that kind of setup, and so on?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think Pittsburgh's always had more struggles against some of those more powerful, big interior guys like a Michael Pierce, who was in Baltimore and had played well against Pittsburgh. I think a guy like Kendrick Green really struggles more with power, and so you're going to bull rush him and try to collapse that pocket because Ben's not mobile enough to move once that pocket begins to collapse. And so I think I give credit to the offensive line because they did a great job on Sunday against the Ravens, really exotic pressure packages from Wink Martindale. They got in 3rd and long a bunch, and they didn't really allow a lot of pressure. So I think from an assignment standpoint, those guys did a good job. So I think maybe confusing them is going to be tougher to do. But I think power and collapsing and constricting the pocket is probably the way to go. I should mention, too, I don't know exactly what things are going to look like for Thursday, but Pittsburgh's on their 5th string left guard right now in John LeGlue, and he's made his first NFL snaps yesterday. Yeah, John LeGlue. No one knows who he is. Most Steeler fans didn't know who he is, but 5th string left guard. They've had a ton of issues there. He's probably going to start Thursday. I can't guarantee it, but that's kind of the way things are trending. And so you probably attack that interior middle where you have a rookie center in Kendrick Green, essentially a rookie left guard in John LeGlue, and a rookie left tackle in Dan Moore Jr., as opposed to the right side with more veteran guys like Trey Turner and Shaquille McCoy for it. So I think you probably collapse and attack those A and B gaps against LeGlue and Green and see if they can handle power and things like that.
Just real quick question about a backup that we're probably not going to see, but sometimes I'm just interested in players. Zach Banner at USC at times struggled to get below 400 pounds. Found a way, I think, at the combine to weigh 361. It was the lightest I think he weighed since he was a freshman, I want to say. Do you know how much he weighs right now? Has that been an issue for him?
I wouldn't say it's been an issue. I think it's the reason why he's playing in the NFL right now. I forget, he had said what his weight was a couple years ago. I think he'd gotten down to a really good place, like 325, 330, something really good for him. Because, yeah, he basically fell out of the league in Cleveland and Indianapolis because of the weight issues. And you're right, he was around 400 pounds, even in the NFL. And so he's had some really bad luck. He tore his ACL in week 1 last year against the Giants. And so, you really felt for the guy because he worked really hard to come back. He got a 2-year extension from Pittsburgh this offseason. It was kind of a surprise to see a 2-year extension, $9 million. And he had a setback in his rehab, though. He has barely played this year. He's on IR for a good chunk of the season. And so he's gotten a couple of snaps, some jumbo type stuff they do around the goal line or short yardage type situations. But it's been a struggle for him just getting on the field health wise. It's a guy that has been on the team for a while, but hasn't played a lot of snaps just because I don't know much about his game because he really hasn't played much as an offensive tackle in the NFL. But a guy who certainly worked hard and had some bad luck along the way.
All right. Receivers, you mentioned that Freiermuth does not drop many, if any, passes at all. That is not the case for the wide receiver group. One, I think, kind of more famously, Deontay Johnson, although from my understanding, he's dropping the ball less this year. Others along the receiving group seem to have made up for it. Big Ben right now is 10th in drop rate, but like 6th in total drops by PFF. Obviously, depends on who you ask and how you count. But I mean, that seems like it's been an issue with the receiving group. On top of that, or I should say, aside from that, the Steelers have done a pretty good job over the past decade and a half of finding receiving talent, even though there have been pockets here and there where it felt like they didn't really have as much as they're kind of used to having. How do you feel about that receiver group as a whole? Have I characterized that drop issue maybe fairly or correctly? And tell me what you think about this group.
Yeah, I think from the drop issue perspective, Deontay's done a great job because you're right. He led the league in drops last year, 14, 15, depending on who you ask, as you referenced. But he's only got 1 to 2 this season. And this guy's first in every single practice, last out every single, end of every single practice. And so this guy's worked really hard. I think for him, it was more just of a focus issue. He wouldn't always look the ball in because he's that quick receiver who wants to get upfield immediately, make someone miss, and turn that 3-yard play into a 30-yard gain. And so once he kind of really focused on just looking the ball in, that kind of unlocked things for him. His hands aren't bad. It's just about finding that consistency. Claypool's had the biggest issues this year with drops and just overall lack of development. And he's got some turf toe stuff that he's probably bothering him quite a bit, but he's supposed to be, as I mentioned earlier, that vertical Z, deep ball winner. And it's probably more contested catch because he's not the burner the way that, again, the Mike Wallace or like true speed guys are, but he's not been able to win consistently enough. It doesn't always play to the physical tools that he's so blessed with. And so the second year jump really has not been there with him. And that's been evident since training camp whenever he was fully healthy. And so that's been a disappointment overall. Deontay's played really well. He's the team's most consistent, reliable receiver, easily the best route runner. And so he'll be a handful to deal with. And then beyond that, it's been kind of thin once you lost Juju. James Washington, he's probably counting that down the days for his contract to expire because he's been really used little in this offense, even after Juju's injury. So Deontay Johnson's going to get a ton of targets, a ton of volume, probably at least 10. That's usually about his number per game. And he's been the number one target in this passing offense.
Do you feel like this second-year follow-up from Claypool is a bit of a disappointment? Because I think were it not for the kind of crazy receiving rookie year that we saw in 2020, including obviously Justin Jefferson, but like players like Michael Pittman and CeeDee Lamb before he got injured and stuff like that, that for I think most years would be a rookie of the year style performance, the way Chase Claypool played last year. This year, we're not seeing as much from him. And I personally, I have him on a couple of fantasy teams. I don't think I've gotten my investment.
You have not. I can promise you have not gotten RI on Claypool.
Is there a general feeling of disappointment regarding him?
Yeah, there is, for sure. I wouldn't even say it's a bit of disappointment. It's just flat out disappointment. And again, I think there's that turf toe injury that he's been battling for probably at least a month, if not more, that you have to think about. But he's not taking the jump. And again, this is a guy that's 6'4", 230, ran 4.42. Like, he should be able to win those physical tools a lot more often than he does. I mean, it is just a lot of it's hard to pinpoint exactly what the issue is. It's just lack of consistency overall, and just being able to be that above the rim type player on those 50-50 balls. He just does not win those consistently enough. And sometimes I wonder, is there too much of an expectation for him to win every single situation? Because I call 50-50 ball for a reason, but I still don't think he's playing up to those expectations and what he did his rookie year. I just haven't seen the jump in year number 2 for him.
Has Ray McCloud taken scrimmage snaps?
He has, and more so recently with Juju being out, he's gotten more. Actually, some games he's had 50 snaps in the slot, and certainly he was.
James Washington must be ticked off.
Yeah, he reportedly asked for a trade this summer, and he probably wishes Pittsburgh would have shipped him out. He's not. He's deleting all the.
It doesn't sound like something Pittsburgh would be comfortable letting a player dictate.
Yeah, well, they traded Melvin Ingram, and he wanted out. And
that's true. Well, he's a vet. That's different.
But he's a veteran guy. Yeah, he's probably a father or something that's like kid. I don't know. Like he's an adult. But James Washington's still a kid overall. So yeah, point taken there. Washington is deleting all the contact information of every Steeler after the season ends because he's just moving on and just wants to go somewhere else where he can play a little bit.
Yeah. You're cool. You.
Exactly. Mostly FUs, not a lot of U-Cools probably overall. But and McCloud has gotten work in the slot again. He's primarily a return guy. He'll be the team's kick and punt returner, and so that's what got him onto the team. But because of some of the injuries, they like to keep Claypool on the outside to be that vertical Z guy. McCloud will see work in the slot.
Cool. I've never heard of Cody White. Who is Cody White?
Yeah, not many people have. I think just Cody White's family and Michigan State fans probably are the only guys that
All right.
have heard of Cody White. I mean, he's barely played, special teams guy.
Cool.
He got brought up because of the injuries, and so he's like a number 5 receiver that very rarely sees time offensively. He'll cover kicks and punts, and that's about it.
All right, cool. Let's one overall offensive question. Matt Canada in college was known for a bunch of heavy motion usage, a lot of play action usage. Didn't feel like it meshed with what the Steelers did when it was announced that he would be the offensive coordinator for the Steelers. Do you feel like that there has been cohesion in the design of the offense? Are we hiding Matt Canada under Ben Roethlisberger's preferences? Have they effectively kind of mixed what the two prefer? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a little tough to judge. Certainly, there have been growing pains with this offense, and I obviously don't think Canada can run his offense as ideally as he would like to. I think it is a misnomer to say that Canada, and you're not saying this obviously, but it's been out there that he needs a mobile quarterback to win. This guy's won with mobile quarterbacks like Graham Harrell, and he's won with guys like Nathan Peterman. I mean, so he's kind of won with a gamut of guys.
Jesus Christ.
And that's typically what happens when you're a college guy that bounces from place to place. You're just kind of thrown into the coaching staff or the personnel that you have, and you just kind of have to work with it. So it's been a mix overall. I think Canada has had a better game plan and opening script in terms of first possession touchdowns. Pittsburgh has 4 touchdowns on their first drive this year. They had 1 from 2019 and 2020 combined under the old OC, and so they've had some better starts this year overall. But some red zone stuff, but you could nitpick and some things like that. But I think Pittsburgh used more in that Ravens game, more pistol, and to me that's always kind of been the best blend of getting Ben away from center, but still having play action, having a downhill run action, and the occasional boot into the flat as well. And so you saw some more pistol in that Ravens game. I think maybe you see some more of that going forward.
All right, well, let's talk about the defense at large. The Steelers are kind of, historically well known for the defense. Keith Butler, I believe, has been there for a little bit. Last year was one of the most blitz-heavy defenses in the league, but part of that is because they had Mike Hilton on the roster. The best blitzing corner I've seen in quite some time. Now they don't. So are they still kind of a blitz heavy defense? Have they dialed it back a little bit? They dealt with a little bit of roster turnover because of free agency. I mentioned Hilton. There was also obviously the edge rusher went to Tennessee, whose name escapes me at the moment.
Bud Dupree,
Bud Dupree, the guy who could run really fast in a straight line. Sorry, I was not a huge fan of his. I was a little bit wrong because he has produced, but did not love him.
Titans fans are not happy right now.
Yeah, Titans fans aren't happy. Yeah,
they're on your side.
But are they still kind of that blitz happy team? Is this something that heading into the game, Kirk Cousins needs to make sure he figures out his hots, or what's going on?
Not really. They're certainly taken a step back. Their blitz rate in past years, I think last year it sat around 35%. This year it's around 25%. So it's really taken a step back by Pittsburgh standards. The overall personality of this defense, Arif, has changed quite a bit because it was really blitz heavy. It was more man heavy. And when you lose some of the edge rush talent, and as you mentioned, losing guys like Mike Hilton, and you just kind of lose some of the better guys in the secondary. Joe Hayden's been hurt quite a bit. They lost they cut Steven Nelson, so they lost and had to replace him as well. And you had more youth in the secondary and new faces like Arthur Millette and Trey Norwood, James Pierre. That's made Pittsburgh a more conservative defense because they're dropping guys into coverage more often. They're playing more zone coverage because they don't want to get beat deep, and they've unfortunately gotten beat deep quite a lot consistently this season. So it's kind of neutered this attack. They did blitz Lamar quite a bit, 37.5% in that game, and they needed to do that. But generally speaking, in their style this year has been to dial things back.
Well, that's been the book on, just as an aside, that's been the book on Lamar, right? Ever since, was it Miami blitzed him forever, and it was a bunch of cover zero, and then the next game he saw a bunch of blitzes, and then this game he saw a bunch of blitzes. That's just right now seems to be the way that teams have been trying to control him.
Including cover zero. Pittsburgh does not run any cover zero, but they did it in that game because they're just copying the Ravens or the Dolphins and Brian Flores playbook. So but I would not expect Pittsburgh to blitz a ton on Kirk Cousins on Thursday.
All right, well, let's talk about the interior defensive line before we move to the edge and talk a little bit about TJ Watt's MVP case. So Chris Wormley is producing, formerly from Baltimore. I saw an anecdote. I don't know if you were the one who shared it or someone else who shared it, but someone on the team pulled Chris Wormley aside and said, hey, if they trade you in division, that tells you exactly what they think of what you can do. You just keep having games like that, the one that he had against Baltimore. Outside of that, has Wormley been, because I think that he had a lot of fans in the draft, has Wormley been, this wrecking ball, or is it just kind of the one game revenge?
Certainly not wrecking ball, but that was Mike Tomlin that told him that once Wormley got traded.
Tomlin, yeah,
it was Tomlin who had said that whenever the trade happened, and certainly I think revenge was on Wormley's mind yesterday. Wormley's played well this year. He's had to replace Stephon Tuitt, who has not played all season. His brother got killed in the offseason, and they had a knee surgery. So, I mean, it's been a very difficult offseason, difficult year for Stephon Tuitt and his family. And so Wormley has played well in relief, but obviously not to that Tuitt level where those highs are going to be incredible. Tuitt had 11 sacks last year, just consistently making A-plus type of plays. But Wormley has played well overall, and so I think he's been a bit underrated by Steelers fans, but probably a little less so this week after that 2.5 sack performance, which is a career high for him. Most sacks he's ever had in a game, college or pro, and so that was really good to see.
Incredible to see. Well, it's interesting because the guy that got paid, besides I guess Watt, the guy that got paid, Bud Dupree, was probably the weakest link of the best defensive line in the NFL last year, right? So you had Tuitt, you had Alu, who's also injured. Mm-hmm. And does it feel like, they're still kind of recovering from that fact that they just don't have the bodies? I mean, obviously they've got Cameron Hayward, who is a one-of-one type player, incredible, but does it feel like they just don't have the bodies up front, that they're relying too much a little bit maybe on TJ Watt and Cameron Hayward? I know Alex Highsmith has played well, especially the last couple of weeks, but does it feel like that?
It has. It's felt like the stars have had to be stars consistently, and then that always hasn't been enough either, because they've certainly struggled to replace some of those key pieces like Tuitt and Alu. And what that did, it forced the backups to be starters and the depth don't play guys to be backups, and it's really kind of put a strain on this team. And so they've had to kind of just mix and match pieces. They signed Montravius Adams off the Saints practice squad a week ago, and he played. He started Sunday at nose tackle for him and played really well overall. He's got a quick first step, and I thought just had good effort and flowed well against some of the perimeter runs that Baltimore ran. But yeah, Pittsburgh's run defense overall has been really poor this year. It was better against Baltimore, and it certainly needed to be. But that is going to be a concern because I think they're still like 30th or 31st in run defense overall this year, and it really has been kind of the Cam Hayward, TJ Watt show, and everyone else is trying to do something. But from a gap assignment, from a gap and assignment standpoint, this team's been poor. From a tackling standpoint, they've not been good enough, and so run defense overall has been a big problem.
Have we seen a lot of Isaiah Buggs?
Earlier this year, you did. He has an ankle injury. He did not play on Sunday against Baltimore. I doubt he'll play on Thursday against Minnesota. He's got talent. I liked him coming out of Alabama. He was reunited with his D-line coach, Carl Dunbar, but he is just the most frustrating player to watch. I mean, there were times in the Chargers game, the last game that he played, where he couldn't even get in his stance correctly. There was one time where he shifted down the line and then just forgot to put his hand down. Like he just stood up like a 2-point stance linebacker and just rushed. It's like, what are you doing?
In college, didn't he line up in like a frog stance or something crazy like that?
Yeah, something like that. But it's just like a super frustrating. Like he's a talented guy. He's strong. He flashes, but I think he's probably one of those guys that coaches just hate to coach because they're just like, we don't know what you're going to get from that guy. And so I think his role has been reducing with Adams playing well, and hopefully they'll get a guy back, Carlos Davis, who's spent most of the year injured. I very much doubt you'll see Isaiah Buggs on Thursday.
Sure. And Isaiah Loudermilk, not related to the Vikings legend Kirk Loudermilk or his son Johnny Loudermilk.
Are those real people?
Real people.
Really?
Yeah.
Multiple Loudermilks, and they're not related.
Yeah, it's spelled differently. L-O-W instead of loud, L-O-U-D. Yeah. I think Isaiah, they're all from the Midwest, of course. The name like Milk, how could you not be?
But how are they not related? Are we sure? Can we take a test?
I'm confident.
Okay. I believe you.
I totally get it.
I just can't believe there were multiple Loudermilks from the Midwest and they are not like.
I triple checked during the draft. I was like, no, because I'm doing the consensus board. This guy's name gets misspelled a lot because there's another H in Isaiah, and so I have to do a bunch of correcting. So I noticed his name a lot. I tried looking it up, and as far as I can tell, maybe I'm wrong, but as far as I can tell, unless we're going way back and there was like a Ellis Island type name correction or something like that, not related.
How about that?
So 5th round rookie, how's he doing? I just had because of the name. I have to ask.
Yeah, it's the first thing that gets me. The multiple H's in there really get you in Isaiah. I've had to spell Isaiah with two because there's Isaiah Buggs and there's Isaiah Loudermilk and they're spelled differently. And there's a different Isaiah on the practice squad. So it's just like a bunch of Isaiahs on this team that I can't keep up with. But no, Loudermilk, they traded up for him, a 5th round guy. I was really surprised by that. It was critical to move at the time. I think his ceiling as a pass rusher is pretty limited because athletically there's not a lot there. But he's been a good run stuffer. I think he's improved his leverage and his power, and his run defense has actually been pretty solid. So a rotational guy, but playing better than I thought he would.
And Carlos Davis, his brother's on the practice squad, Khalil Davis, right? I think they're twins. Is that right?
Twin brothers, yeah. He got signed a couple weeks ago, and Carlos just came off of IR, and Khalil's been on the practice squad. So we'll see if Carlos Davis plays. They activated him off of IR, then just didn't dress him. So it was kind of weird. They didn't have to bring him off IR, so I'm not really sure.
Right,
what
yeah,
the rationale
keep him
there.
practicing.
Right, so I'm not totally sure what's going on there.
All right, edge defenders, T.J. Watt. In contention for a sack record, certainly sack title. Pro Football Talk tweeted out that TJ Watt deserves to be in the MVP conversation. I dislike the value portion of the MVP conversation, but given that it is part of the conversation, is that ridiculous?
I wouldn't be mad if someone brought it up. I mean, he's not going to win it. It's going to go to a quarterback. I mean, there's no way. Because Strahan didn't even win it his year of his sack.
That's right.
So, I don't think TJ Watt's going to do it. But, I mean, in terms of defensive player of the year, hopefully this is the year for TJ Watt. Myself and Steelers Nation have been screaming for him to be the guy for 3 years. So, you guys
he's the 3-year sack leader right now, right? Something like that?
Last year, I think. Well, last year I know he led the league in sacks. I don't know about the other years. I don't think he did.
I mean, like as a group,
like
if you combined, yeah. So I think he's the sack leader over the past 3 years combined.
I would imagine so, unless Chandler Jones is there, but it's probably TJ Watt. But yeah, I mean, Watt's unbelievable, and so hopefully this is the year he takes home the hardware for Defensive Player of the Year. Certainly deserves it, and so I mean, you didn't think that guys like Cam Hayward, TJ Watt had an extra level because you thought you saw their best, but those guys just find a way to continue to improve the game and become more and more dominant. And so yeah, Watt's going to be obviously him and Hayward the top two threats for Minnesota to try to game plan around offensively.
And then I mentioned Alex Highsmith briefly. He came in as an injury sub last year near the end of the year. I think he played like 5 games as a starter and then obviously a couple more as a rotational guy. Looked impressive in those 5 games. It would have been impossible for him to continue that pace heading into his second year. So he's kind of set up to fail just because of regression. But how do you feel Highsmith has done stepping into that role?
I think he's done well. I don't think it's quite as well as I thought he would do this summer. And maybe that's just some of the, hope springs eternal of training camp where everyone watches their guy and says, this is the best guy in football. And like, no, everyone's going to be shocked by him. And it's never, you can never quite reach his expectations. Because to me, Highsmith had the best training camp of a Steel that I've ever seen. And I've been going to training camp for 6-7 years now. To me, it was the best, most dominant, consistent performance overall. Maybe because he played the Steelers offensive line and they're not quite good. So maybe that had something to do with it. I think Highsmith has played well. The pass rush production's been hit and miss. It's kind of been condensed more, and he's got 2 games this year, 1.5 sacks, and not a lot of pass rush production in other games. But his run defense has improved. He's a really well-conditioned guy. His hand use overall, he's gotten stronger. His bull rush is more effective. So it's not been quite the complementary piece as Bud Dupree was to TJ Watt last season, but it's been similar and it's been getting better. And so I think he's in a pretty good place right now.
Speaking of players whose high mark was their rookie years, let's talk about the inside linebackers. Devin Bush, disappointment? ?
No question mark, exclamation point there, unfortunately, with Devin Bush. And I will say this. I mean, obviously, he's coming off the torn ACL, and that's just a tough injury to come back from. And the fact that he was available, like he was ready for day one at training camp. And he tore his ACL in October. I think we kind of forget and take for granted how difficult of a journey that is in a pandemic, no less, to rehab in those late nights and early mornings of rehab and physical therapy and things like that. But he certainly has struggled, and that's kind of just the bottom line. He has not played well. I think there's a hyper focus on Bush because other guys have not played well either, but that does not absolve Bush, who has certainly struggled to be aggressive, to play downhill, to take on blocks, get off blocks, and make an impact in coverage and things like that. So it has been it's actually gotten worse overall. I thought he played okay against Baltimore, but the Chargers game, the Bengals game, he was the worst player on the field. And so it's been a very difficult season for Devin Bush.
So I think, what is it? Robert Spillane's on the COVID-19 list.
Just got activated today, okay. But he's got a knee injury, so I still don't know if he's going to play or not.
Well, so he was a big part of I mentioned that, Mike Hilton was a big part of the blitz plan. Robert Spillane, back when the Steelers were blitz heavy, huge part of the blitz plan. So now it's just Joe Schobert, who they got from Jacksonville, I want to say, is the inside linebacker. Any other things that we should know about the inside linebacker group?
No, it's going to be those two. Spillane was playing in dime packages this year. Again, I don't get the sense he's going to play, but I'm not 100% sure where he's at because he has not been on the injury report much because he's been on COVID. You don't have to report injuries whenever you're on the COVID list. Yeah, it's been Schobert and Bush, and Schobert has played better than Devin Bush, but overall has not played great either. I thought he had a pretty poor game against Baltimore. Has not done as well out in space. I think he's done decent from a veteran communication standpoint, but neither of those guys have played well enough in terms of making splash plays, getting downhill, getting off of blocks. And that's one of the big reasons why this run defense has been poor.
Anything from, and I missed this when I was talking about the edge rushers, anything from Taco Charlton?
I think he's still comfortable on his feet because he's a big, long guy, and he's played in 3-4 systems before, and I think Miami and KC, but Pittsburgh's system's a little bit different, and so I think he's kind of getting adjusted to some of the different alignments and fronts that they run. But overall, his actual production has been pretty minimal. But yeah, I mean, you wish you had Melvin Ingram because he was such a really good rotational number 3, but he wanted to be more than a number 3, and that's why he's in KC right now.
Cool. Well, let's talk about that secondary group. Joe Hayden, does he still have it? Minkah Fitzpatrick, is he as good as advertised? It really seems like it. Terrell Edmonds, is he actually a safety or is he just a small linebacker? I mean, the guy backing him up is definitely a small linebacker, Miles Killebrew. And then how have players like Akella Witherspoon worked out? Cameron Sutton, it seems like he's been having not a bad season. I don't know. And then the nickel, I think, is Art Millette, even though Our Lads right now is listing Trey Norwood as the nickel guy. Tell me about the secondary.
Yeah, it's definitely been a weak point. They've taken a step back, and it's predictable with some of the losses they had. The loss of Mike Hilton to Cincinnati, the release of Steven Nelson. You kind of forced some young guys to step up. They've had injuries there. Joe Hayden, Mike Tomlin didn't seem particularly optimistic about Hayden's chances of playing on Thursday. He's missed 3 games with a foot sprain, so I kind of doubt he'll play. So it's likely the starting corners will be Akella Witherspoon at left corner and Cam Sutton at right corner. They don't travel; they just play size. So don't expect anyone to move with Jefferson or Adam Thielen. They had James Pierre in there, and he's really struggled. And so Witherspoon got his first start of the season on Sunday, and I thought played pretty well overall. He's a better coverage guy than he is a tackling or downhill kind of guy. Cam Sutton's done a nice job overall. The slot position has kind of been a rotation between Millette and Norwood, so it'll probably be Millette with Norwood working in dime packages. And then Minkah, I think, has been excellent. And you're right, Edmonds is kind of just a box linebacker.
Cool. If you're the Vikings, so we don't know if Adam Thielen's going to be healthy. I suspect he's not going to be because of the high ankle sprain. If you're the Vikings, you've got a surprising player in KJ Osborne, is a really good wide receiver 3, maybe not quite the quality of a wide receiver 2. You've got Justin Jefferson, who's Justin Jefferson, and it's kind of it. You probably don't have Dalvin Cook for this game. You don't have Irv Smith, so you've got Tyler Conklin in this game. How do you attack this secondary from a passing game? Do you just funnel it all through Justin Jefferson and hope the Steelers kind of figure out a way to stop it, or do you think that kind of a diversity in a passing attack is the best way to deal with this?
I would lean towards the latter. I mean, Jefferson's a great player and better than any corner Pittsburgh has to cover him, but Pittsburgh, to their credit, really takes a very clear and concerted effort to take away top weapons, and especially if Thielen's not going to play in this one and Jefferson's kind of the clear-cut number 1 guy, Pittsburgh will bracket a lot. They'll spin Minkah down to play inside leverage, and they'll have the corner outside. They'll play some 2-man and have the receiver or the cornerback trail underneath the receiver and have safeties over the top on more 3rd and long, end of half and the game type situations. And so they really kind of force teams to rely on their plan B, plan C kind of guys. They've taken away the Darren Wallers of the world, the Stephon Diggs of the world, Devontae Adams, guys like that. So I think that'll probably be Pittsburgh's plan in this one. And so I think it'll kind of force Kirk and this offense to go to the other options on this team.
All right. And then real quick, special teams. How cool is the thick punter Presley Harvin?
It depends which punt he had, because when it's 64 yards and it goes out the half-yard line, it's very cool to have a fat punter. When it's a 27-yard punt, it's very uncool to have a fat punter. And so both of those things happen on Sunday. No, I mean, he's a rookie, so you're going to get some inconsistency there. But as a punter, your leash is not very long. Your margin of error is pretty small. And so it's been a fun story. Seems like a really good guy. But it has been inconsistent. But Boswell has been amazing. Like, if it wasn't for Justin Tucker, Boswell would be considered the best kicker in football. I think that gap between those guys is shrinking pretty rapidly. And so
that was not the conversation with Boswell 2-3 years ago, though, right? It felt like he was a huge liability.
It was 2018. He had an injury that year, and I
Okay.
think it was kind of underreported at the time. But aside from that year, I mean, not that you can throw those things out the window, but aside from that year, he's been excellent and consistently good, and he's been trusted more. He's been hitting more 50-yarders at Heinz Field. Tomlin's been more aggressive in letting him kick 50-yarders at Heinz Field. Obviously, this game in Minnesota this week, but Boz has been fantastic.
And at return, is it Ray McLeod doing both punts and kicks?
Yeah, he'll do both. And I think he's done a good job. Pittsburgh before McLeod was consistently one of the worst teams in the kick return game. They just didn't really value it well. They would just throw out. One year, they had a bunch of return guys, cut them all, and just put out like Juju for week one. Hadn't taken a return the entire summer. And they were just like, you do it for week one. And it was pretty poor results overall. Last note on special teams, Pittsburgh has 2 punt blocks this season, both by Miles Killebrew. Danny Smith, to me, is the best at scheming up some of those punt blocks and those punt blitzes and getting guys free with stunts and twists and things like that. So who really stress the protection and make sure the up back, the long snapper are on the same page from an opponent standpoint. And if they're not, then watch out for 28. He might come up through that A or B gap and get to the punter.
Oh, yeah, the 100% that's going to happen.
Is that 100%? Is that just the life of a Vikings fan, just special teams, doom and gloom?
Oh, yeah. For sure. This is the best special teams the Vikings have overall fielded in a long time. And, I mean, they still allowed a punt block touchdown. So the Lions.
That's the best. Yeah. That's when it's at its best. They allowed one against Detroit.
Yeah.
They did. Oh, wow. I didn't see that.
Yeah, that's how, well, not this week. A couple weeks ago, it's how Detroit got back. So the Vikings have only had 1-score games. The Vikings were in that first Detroit matchup up by 2 scores. One of the ways that Detroit got back and forced the Vikings to have a comeback at all was through a punt block. So,
oh, wow. What was the breakdown on that play? Do you remember? Was it just like up the middle thing? Was it an off the edge or just?
If I remember correctly, it was, I want to say like the C gap. So because it's a punt block, it kind of looks up the middle-ish, but it's not. Mm-hmm. Guy just didn't get his side. He blocked down against the wrong guy. It was just a miss. So I don't think it was like Detroit saw something and exploited it. I think it was just a miss. How do they do against fakes? Because the Vikings have this super fast running back that's so far done 2 as the punt protector, fake snaps or whatever you want to call direct snaps to the punt protector runs. One of them was called back because of an illegal formation. But it sounds like something that they want to do. So how do they do against, do you know, against punt fakes?
That's the Iowa State kid, right? How do you say Kene
Wangu? Yeah.
Wangu. Yeah, he was really impressive coming out of the draft, and I know he's had like 2 kick return touchdowns, I think, too this year.
Yeah, out of like 9 attempts. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really crazy. That's a good question. I don't have a good answer for that.
Most people don't.
I'm gonna have to research it the rest of the night. So that was my night. Thank you, Sarif. I would imagine they have a really good coordinator in Danny Smith, and he's the bubblegum chewer, and he's just a character. But so I imagine they're going to be probably well prepared for that stuff if it's on tape. And yeah, I think that's a good point. So they just don't. Not a lot of fakes have been run against Pittsburgh too much.
Yeah,
so,
no, I mean fair enough. And it's usually they see something, right? They see like they'll crowd one side of the line or something like that, so they'll run the punt to the opposite. So
that may make Pittsburgh to be less aggressive though, because they're worried about the fakes. So that actually may kind of work for them to not want to bring their guys because they're just kind of focused on being safe and not getting burned by
establish the fake, man.
That's hashtag establish the fake.
Yeah. All right. Is there a exhaustive review? Is there anything that we missed that you definitely wanted to touch on? I know that there's 2 North Dakota State alums that are refused to talk about, and I believe successfully have not talked about on the team. So,
well, we have to talk about them then. Joe Haig and Derek Tuska, right? Those are the 2.
Yeah, guys. Those are the 2. Yeah. No, we don't have to.
Well, Haig's on COVID and Tuska is not very good, so I'd rather not talk about those guys right now.
Yeah, well, as not very good is how I'd characterize a lot of NDSU Bison. So,
oh my goodness,
no
wow, Easton Stick's gonna come find you or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so I've heard.
Can I ask you one question? Speaking of random quarterbacks, the Case Cookus origin story. I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, but I mean, what's the story there?
Well, he's just a real guy. That's the story. Like his name is so ridiculous. I mean, so when the Vikings had their entire quarterback room minus Jake Browning go on the COVID list, they needed arms in camp, and so they signed Case Cookus, former I think the Northern Arizona quarterback, and someone else who actually I should know his name because I think he signed on for longer. Like they cut Case Cookus before this guy, and I already forgot his name. Okay. But the name Case Cookus was so absurd to me, like not even Madden generated, just like the Sims kind of name, right?
Okay.
That I couldn't not tweet out the name every time it came up. So that's all that is. I mean he's like a fun player to watch. Like if you watch any of his college stuff, which it's Northern Arizona, I don't know how much of their tape you have.
Every week I got Northern Arizona versus like Western Arizona on my
Yeah,
television.
perfect. Yeah, the directional Arizonas, you got to get those.
Yeah.
So when he played, and he has an extensive injury history, but when he plays like balls to the wall. Like he's got a huge arm. He loves to use it. When he throws picks, which in college was not that much, but more than it should be, right? For a guy playing that level of competition. He's the opposite of Teddy. He's going to absolutely tackle the hell out of that guy. He's gotten a targeting penalty before on a run block.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my
he
goodness.
rules.
Wow.
So there's that, but also, I mean, just his name is Case Cookus. So that's
Right.
that's the whole deal with that.
I really hope they do like a cringy Kurt Warner inspired movie of Case Cookus.
Oh,
that
Jesus.
Warner movie looks so.
Oh my
I mean,
God.
I haven't seen it, but it just looks really,
Well,
really bad.
it's a independent production company, right?
Is it?
Because
It
I think
looks
it's,
like it.
I think it's Kurt Warner's production company, I want to say, but it's one of those that I don't know if you've ever seen any of those PureFlix films, like God's
Mhm.
Not Dead and stuff like that. Actually, I don't think it's got the production quality of a lot of PureFlix films, but it's it's very marketed towards a specific audience. It's got its own niche, and so it doesn't really try to get theatrical releases all that much. Obviously, this one is, but as a production company, it's just it just doesn't have a budget, right? And so it's
Right.
one of those Christian production companies that primarily makes money by selling to like an evangelical audience, and so they don't really have
Okay.
to market themselves. So yeah, I mean, it looks awful, but that's kind of I think he's funding it, so that's kind of just what you get out of it.
Yeah, this is more information than I thought I needed, but this is incredible. I mean, that's a heck of a flex to have your own production company and make a movie about yourself. I mean, hey, I guess I can't fault that. Too
My
much.
understanding is, and this could just be part of the narrative, because if you're trying to market this to a larger audience, crafting a narrative is a really smart way to do it. So I don't know if this is true, but he said he tried selling the film to Hollywood and they didn't want to buy it, which I refuse to believe. I mean, that's just like, first of all, they buy the rights to films at the drop of a hat without ever producing it. But second, I mean, it is a compelling story.
It's a legitimately like interesting story.
Yeah,
Sure.
he was working at Hy-Vee. He played in NFL Europe. I mean, there's that anecdote of him in Packers camp refusing to take the rep because he didn't feel ready. I mean, it's just that there's a perfect story, right?
Mhm.
And the idea that like this Hall of Famer couldn't sell his story to Hollywood is like, I don't know about that. But that's what he's saying, that Hollywood, maybe, I don't know, maybe he'll say something like, Hollywood didn't want to tell a story this clean and wholesome. They wanted Hollywood just demanded more sex and violence, and he refused.
Yeah.
Something like that.
He
That's
couldn't
how a
get
lot
the
of
part in like Fast and Furious 13 or something, and so now he's doing his own thing as revenge. All right, I respect it.
Yeah. So yeah, looking forward to that, man. But before you go, I think Steelers favored or Vikings favored, Jesus, by 3.5. As you can tell, I'm very confident in that line. What's your score prediction?
Man, that's a good question. I haven't gotten through a lot of Vikings tape so far. I mean, it's hard not to be impressed by that win. I will say I'm wrong on my picks a lot. Like, people should not listen to me or do the opposite of what I think is going to happen. I picked them to beat the Bengals. They lost to the Bengals. I picked Baltimore to win, and Pittsburgh won. So I think I got to go with Pittsburgh on this one, just because you kind of find that way to win, and I think that maybe it'll galvanize the team. And that all sounds, I guess, good on a bumper sticker. But I think overall this defense is playing better. They're getting a little bit healthier as well, and so I'll go Pittsburgh on this one. 21.
Do you think the Steelers are a good team?
I think they're the epitome of a good team, and like in that sense of they're never going to be great, and like they're going to be in every single game, but they're not going to win these games down the stretch. So if they get in the playoffs, they're going to be a one and done kind of squad, because they're a good team.
Let me tell you about being in every single game. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, preaching to the choir. So I think they're a competitive team. They certainly. They can get pressure. They can create some takeaways, and they can, the offense is, when it's on, it can be decent. But it's just a team in a lot of transition and a lot of flux and a lot of injury, and so I think they're just kind of the epitome of a slightly above average kind of team.
Cool. Well, tell people where they can find your work. Obviously, you do the Steelers Depot does the combine tracker that's insanely useful every year. I think they also do a Senior Bowl tracker. But like, what else does Steelers Depot do? What do you do? How can they find you?
Yeah, SteelersDepot.com. You can find me on Twitter at Alex_Kozora. You can find Dave Bryan at Steelers Depot. We just try to be as comprehensive as possible. And so we'll have a scouting report, for example, on the Vikings Thursday morning on the site with myself, Josh Carney, Tom Mead, just trying to analyze this team individually and schematically. And we just try to break down the team as much as possible from every single angle. I guess it is kind of truly in that Depot sort of name. So whether it's sack breakdowns, film breakdowns, obviously recapping press conferences and player interviews and stuff like that, we'll be at the Senior Bowl this year. You're going to be in Mobile this year, Reef?
I might head to the Shrine Bowl, right? Because they're opposite each other.
Right, it's in Vegas, yeah. So I don't blame you there. And I think we will have a couple of our guys out there in Vegas for the Shrine Bowl this year. But yeah, so we just try to cover it as extensively as possible.
All right, cool. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question's from Christian, who says, when you discount all points scored by either team in the last 2 minutes of the first half from all Vikings games this season, the Vikings are 10-2 and currently the best team in the NFL. Why is everyone so mad about a team that is clearly awesome 96% of the time?
You know, when you put it like that, it's unassailable.
It truly is. And Damian Barrett goes one further, who asks, how good would we be playing if we had a defensively minded head coach?
That's a really good question, because you take an offense like this, one that puts you in a position to always be ahead by at least 6 points in a game. You just have to hold on to a lead. So I think, if the Vikings move on, they should finally, for the first time in a long time, hire a defensively minded head coach.
It's ridiculous. It's incredibly stupid. And the fact that this team cannot hold on to a lead to save its life is just tragic. Also from Damian Barrett, does James feel a tinge of disappointment that the 185 points scored by his kickers ultimately counted for nothing as he was playing a forfeited opponent? Or is it just another reason for him to love the Hell League?
Well,
I can tell you that I was playing Eric Thompson this week in the Hell League, and the rule, of course, for all Norse Code leagues is you have to play a kicker who is starting that week. And
a reminder, in the Hell League, there's 2 kicker slots. So in both of those slots, you have to have a kicker who's starting.
Yep, and you cannot have somebody on your bench that is starting.
They don't have to be starting. If for some reason that team is a backup kicker and they're active on game day,
yes,
that counts.
Correct. However,
he came up.
However, he was playing a kicker that was cut yesterday, or he was cut on Saturday. So I didn't tell him this. He discovered at 11:50, and
you're under no obligation, even though you're the commissioner, you're under no obligation to tell him.
Absolutely none. And nope. And he already knew when I had messaged. By the time I messaged him, by the time that game kicked off, because that's who I am as a person, he already knew.
By the way.
Yep, he already knew that he was going to have to forfeit, and then he got curb stomped by 100.
But James is declining the forfeit.
Yeah.
Which
that speaks to me as a person, I'm sure.
Yeah.
185 points by my kickers,
which means that the kicker margin in the game, which is important, is 204 points.
It was absurd. Let's go to Kenneth Allen, who asks, do you know anything about Udo as a person? Anything which might make me hate him less? Does he foster kittens or feed starving children or anything?
I haven't interacted with him a ton, but they've all been extremely pleasant interactions. I know that he loves his mom a lot. I don't know, in terms of offensive lineman interactions, the most pleasant and fun offensive lineman that I've interacted with, aside from Alex Boone, was TJ Clemmings. So, maybe that's not a great gauge of how good of a player you are, but, Clemmings seemed like, I don't know him as a person, but Clemmings seemed like a really good person. So, Udo seems like a pretty good person.
Maybe that's the secret. Maybe you have to be a terrible person in order to play good offensive line for Minnesota.
Was it Udo that played Among Us with Luke Braun and all of them back when people still played Among Us?
I don't remember if it was Udo. There was definitely a Vikings player, but I don't remember if it was Udo that was involved.
Might have been him. In which case, if that was him, he was really chill. He was cool.
Also from Kenneth Allen, a significant part of Vikings Twitter is doing the "it's not Cousins' fault, he is actually playing really well" dance. Obviously, a majority of the blame for the loss falls elsewhere, but do you think it's accurate to say Cousins played well yesterday?
No, but I don't think he played like game-losingly poor either. Um, okay, one example of how a quarterback can impact wins and losses outside of how well they throw the ball, how accurate they are, how well they read plays, etc. In that final drive that the Vikings marched 19 yards for a touchdown, um, again, almost all of which were runs. Cousins could have played a bigger role in making sure that the Vikings were likely to win because twice they snapped the ball with over 10 seconds left running on the play clock on a running clock. The last play was made with, I think, 4 seconds left on the clock. So the Vikings could have consumed 20 more seconds or realistically 18 more seconds than they actually did in an end of game situation. That doesn't make the loss his fault, right? Like the loss is whatever happened on defense on that drive that matters more, right? And then, of course, all the other stuff in the rest of the game that put the Vikings in that position matter, right? That one thing doesn't make it Cousins' fault. But those kind of things impact games in ways that allow quarterbacks to improve their winning percentage, right? Like, I don't believe in QB wins, but over a huge sample, it is interesting, right, that Cousins is about 500. I don't know that it's dispositive, right, because Matthew Stafford gets out of Detroit, he starts playing really well, despite having those 3 games where he throws like pick sixes. He's still one of the league leaders in EPA. Rams are still a pretty good team. So it's obviously the context of who you're playing with matters, right? But this is kind of why some of the statistics that we typically use don't capture the totality of playing quarterback. Cousins played fine. Like, he's the FedEx Air Player of the Week, or he's a nominee for FedEx Air Player of the Week. So, like, that's dumb. Like, no, he didn't play that well. But he was fine. He had some mistakes. I think the fumble is kind of under-discussed. The pick that he almost threw, under-discussed. He made some poor choices on the non-screen plays, which don't get talked about a ton. But, he had some great throws and some really good opportunities that weren't taken advantage of. And so I don't think that the loss is his fault. I don't think he played, like, well, though. Like, I don't think this is an example where Cousins willed the Vikings to a win and he was just let down by the defense. Like, the defense was the last unit on the field, so they'll feel the brunt of it. But if the Vikings score in the first half that are not in ways that are not field goals, we're not talking about this. So, yeah, if I'm listing off like the top 3 things, I don't think Cousins makes the list in terms of the things that went wrong in the game that led to the loss. But I don't like, this isn't a case where Cousins played so well that it's just like it's not like a Phillip Rivers Chargers tragedy.
No. Jeremy would like to talk about something we didn't cover in the Lions review because I knew it was going to end up being in the mailbag. Would like Arif's thoughts on the 2-point conversion philosophy of the Vikings. When is the right time? Is there really a chart that coaches leverage, or is it just a gut feeling? Also, if we kicked all 3 extra points, Detroit would have to have scored that same TD and converted a 2-point conversion and still won, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like, when that first 2-point conversion attempt is being considered, you don't know what the score at the end of the game is going to be. Like, you don't know what the map of touchdowns is going to be, right? You don't know how you're going to get there. 2-point conversions convert at about half the rate of extra points. About, right? Like, it's close enough where I believe 2-point conversions are something like 48%, extra points are something like 98%. With the Vikings, these things change for both, evidently. So that's one where if there isn't like a specific end of game math problem you're working on, like you're down 14, you finally score a touchdown, you should go for 2 or something like that, which you should, by the way. I am very deferential to coaches. Like, we'll harp on Zimmer for going for 2 and then missing it and then being forced essentially to chase it. But I am fine with it because at those small margins, it is these situational factors that really kind of overwhelm the analytical analysis, right? Like, how well are we running the ball? How was our offensive line doing? Did we see something on tape that we could exploit? Do we have a particular 2-point play that we haven't unveiled that we know is going to work here? And on and on and on and on. Like, do they have a player who's injured? Are they in hurry up and have they been tired on this drive? Those kinds of things kind of overwhelm at these small margins the difference between a 2-point and an extra point. So I don't know why. He explained his decision, and he essentially said it felt like the right thing to do at the time. So he didn't really go into a lot of detail about what went into the decision. I don't mind it. It can be frustrating, given that it's like a very binary outcome, right? So either you get it or you don't. You don't get partial points for being good at trying it. And maybe you can quibble with the play calling. Like, I think that the run up the middle when your offensive line's getting beat up is not a great idea. But I think the decision to go for it is very whatever. And then they were forced to continue going for it as the game went on, which again is whatever. So yeah, if they kick those 3 extra points, then the Lions are forced to go into a 2-point conversion but like, you don't know that going in. You don't know that in the second quarter, or I guess the top of the third quarter, when you decide to go for 2. All you know is what the score is now and how you've been playing. That's the only thing you know. So I don't if you'd made every extra point, that would have been better than missing 3 consecutive 2-point attempts, fine. But the Lions might have changed their philosophy if you'd just been kicking extra points, right? They might have gone for 2 at some point. So you don't know how they respond to how the situation evolves as you craft out these hypotheticals. And then beyond that, you could just say, well, okay, but if the Vikings had just driven a couple more yards on this other drive, they would have been able to kick a field goal, and then you don't have to worry about any of that at all. So, yeah. I'm not trying to berate the question asker because they're just asking what my philosophy is, but I'm very differential to coaches on the 2-point stuff.
Dr. Aaron Matson asks, number 1, are we in the darkest timeline? And 2, if the Vikings were to tear it all down in the offseason, would they look to trade Dalvin Cook as well to not have so much cap space locked up by a running back, even if he's a very good one?
No, the Vikings would be better if we were in the darkest timeline.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
I think Vikings win the Super Bowl in the darkest timeline. That's the only way this works.
I think the Vikings winning the Super Bowl and then having it taken away from them in some sort of investigation that's so dispositive that even Vikings fans agree that Super Bowl doesn't count. That would be extremely, yeah.
That would be. I don't know if you've watched the Disney Plus show What If.
Oh yeah.
This is the one where Doctor Strange ends everything. That's what this is. That's the darkest of timelines.
Yeah. As for the tear it all down in the offseason, no, I don't think they would trade Dalvin Cook.
No.
If they could, I would say that they should. Right? People know my thoughts on that, but no, I don't think they would.
Next question's from Raul, who asks, is it me or has Zimmer exceedingly failed when his defense has got to get a stop at the end of a game? Not just this week, but in general during his tenure.
I think we're over-focusing on this year and to some extent last year. I think over the course of his career as a head coach, he's actually not been bad at end of game, stopping game-winning drives and stuff like that. He's actually been pretty good at that. So, no. But it's very easy to get caught up in the fact that this has happened really consistently. And then also, we are kind of conflating the stuff that happens at the end of halves versus the stuff that happens at the end of games. Now, the Vikings defense hasn't been good at the end of games, but they've been significantly better at the end of the fourth quarter than they have been at the end of the second quarter, because they're always giving up scores at the end of the second quarter, right? At the end of the fourth quarter, they've had stops. In overtime, they've had stops. It's mostly the biggest problem is the end of the second quarter. We're confusing a lot of similar looking things with each other.
They even stopped the Ravens during overtime. Didn't they? They stopped them twice.
Twice. Yeah.
It was just the offense couldn't do a damn thing with it. It was incredibly frustrating. Next question's from the Oli Udo Noodle Stan. How and why will the Vikings hire Nate Hackett as the head coach, who will then bring Rodgers with him in a rebuild/reload effort, keeping Rick and setting the Vikings up to lose in the NFC Championship game?
So Nate Hackett is currently the offensive coordinator, technically, for the Green Bay Packers. The last I remember Nathaniel Hackett's name being thrown around Jaguars fans were mad at him, although he was better than their other offensive coordinators in that time span, including DeFilippo. And Bills fans were mad at him, but I guess he's doing well in Green Bay. I don't know how much of that matters, but if his only purpose is to recruit Aaron Rodgers to the Vikings, obviously that would be worth it, especially to set up what eventually would be a very funny NFC Championship collapse. I think that the way that they would do it is like very reminiscent of like the way that we would stake out, you know, new free agents or hires in the 2000s, where people would be parked outside the facility and they'd be like shuttling people in these dark vans so you couldn't tell who was where, and you'd have to get really good at using flight aware software, but it wouldn't matter because Green Bay is like right over the border, so they would just drive. I like the idea of it being a very clandestine affair and just being announced out of nowhere. That I think is kind of the best way to do it. Is to just announce one day that you've offered Nate Hackett the job. I don't think it's possible under the current NFL rules. I think you have to like let the Packers know or whatever. But you know, if he wants to be the head coach, who cares?
And of course, Brad Childress would end up being the driver.
Yep.
That's the only way that works in my head. Brian Jellerson asks, with our seasonal "why do I root for this team" style loss out of the way, are all of our other losses upgraded back to moral victory status?
That upgrade is pending the results of the season, unfortunately. If the Vikings lose out for the rest of the season, yeah, all of those other losses that are close are upgraded to moral victory status. So Cardinals game, moral victory. Baltimore game, moral victory. There's at least one more good team in there, right? The Cincinnati kind of. They at one point they were the number one seed in the AFC, I guess, before they lost to the Jets. What a weird season. That's kind of a moral victory. So in a world where the Vikings like take a bunch of losses, so those are moral victories in that context. But if the Vikings are good enough to be in the playoff race and they just miss by half a game or one game or whatever, those are no longer moral victories. They are what ifs, and that's worse. So it really just depends. And though the Vikings are bad enough to lose to the Lions, they're also good enough to beat the Packers and good enough to beat the Cardinals. I mean, that game was close.
Yeah. Nolan Kaler asks, after an exciting Veneer Cup capped off another fabulous and unrivaled college football season, it needs to be asked, which Canadian school is the equivalent of James Madison?
I haven't followed Canadian football, unsurprisingly. My understanding is that they have changed the league name from CIS Sports, which ruled because it was also the Commonwealth of Independent States, also known as the Soviet bloc, but CIS Sports, to U Sports, which is the worst name. U Sports? That doesn't tell me anything. So U Sports, I believe the most dominant football team in college, in Canadian college, American gridiron football, whatever they call it, is Laval, or has been over the course of the past couple of years. So I'm just going to say that Laval is the James Madison. They produce great Canadian offensive linemen. And they win in the trenches, as far as I can remember, and that reminds me of James Madison, sure. So
speaking of which, James Madison has their next contest on Friday night.
Yeah, so we're gonna find out that Friday night if we're going to. Well, I guess NDSU has to win, which is no guarantee.
But that is no guarantee, and if NDSU doesn't win, the next game is right back at James Madison.
Yeah. The like seeding and home field stuff is like getting really weird in the FCS. Like in D2, it's D3. In D3, Mount Union was erroneously awarded a home semifinal matchup, despite the fact that the other team, by every rule in the book, should have the home field advantage. And reporters asked the NCAA about it, and the like on a live press conference call or something like that. And on the other side of the conference call, the commissioner of the playoff was like, "Yeah, you're right. That is what the rule says," and then just didn't elaborate. So Mount Union just gets a home game because like the rule is it's nuts. Because like the rule is like so they're both tied in terms of wins and losses, so they both share technically by that standard of seeding, and so the tiebreaker is whoever won their last matchup. And it was the other team. They won the national championship. last year against, and they ran through Mount Union to do it. So it's unambiguous. They should just have home field, and they don't have it. So all of that to just say, yeah, hopefully James Madison has a home game if they win and NDSU loses. I don't know how any of this stuff works anymore.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens with.
Yeah, that is what the rule says.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Be like, as a matter of fact, yes. Also from Nolan Kaler, why will the Bombers win the Grey Cup this weekend, and how will we celebrate this inevitable victory? We don't always have to live in misery.
Bombers fans don't live in misery, though. They're like one of the more successful teams in the CFL. I mean, right now they're the top of the Grey Cup odds boards, so we know that they've got the best chances of winning. So I don't know, man. It just seems like the Bombers are good in kind of basically every phase of the game. I don't really see kind of what the weakness is for them. I think they'll just kind of dominate overall. I mean, they've got extra push off the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. They're going to win in the trenches. They've got a superior quarterback. Yeah, I think the Bombers have it.
I like how that's the second answer in a row that involves win in the trenches.
Oh yeah, for sure. The difference is I do know Laval has a history of producing offensive linemen. I'm just assuming the Bombers are better at this stuff. I have no idea.
Let's go to Fu, who asks, what actually is Cousins' future in the league going to be? I'm not convinced anyone thinks he's going to get them over the hump. So is he just going to be a more timid Fitzpatrick who gets a new team every year eventually?
Okay, I didn't actually see this question in the show notes. So James reading it aloud, my first reaction was, oh, he's going to be like Ryan Fitzpatrick, but without balls. So glad that's how the question finished. Yeah, I think he's going to be a bridge starter for a bunch of teams for the rest of the... Like, if this doesn't work out, right, like if he doesn't sign an extension with the Vikings and plays out that $45 million cap hit next year, and that's it, the Vikings and Cousins part ways, he could very well be like a really expensive starter bridge, kind of in the way that Fitzpatrick has been, that Foles kind of weirdly has been, that Dalton was this year with Justin Fields, I guess. I don't know. But be one of those quarterbacks that's consistently competing for a starting job, but is never kind of in that level of security that Cousins so really desperately wanted when he was deciding between the Jets and the Vikings.
Cousins as a Panther in 2 years.
Oh, I like that. That's good.
Is an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Let's go to Justin Fields apologist, who asks, my dad has not kept up with the NFL for like 2 to 3 years and will likely be watching Thursday Night Football with me this week. How can I possibly explain the Viking season to him without looking like Charlie from It's Always Sunny talking about Pepe Silvia?
First, you sit him down and explain that Case Cookus is a real person.
Yes, that is that's your first thing. Then break out the red string.
Yeah, and then from there, I think everything else will look a little bit more reasonable. Hey, I just need you to know that the Vikings at some point this year actually rostered and paid the salary to a person named Case Cookus. That person is real. This is what they look like. This is what college they play for. After that, you could say basically anything. I don't know. Your dad was keeping up with the NFL prior to this. He knows what the Vikings are like. They're the Vikings. Just explain that. Just say, hey, remember the 2010 season? Well, that was crazier than this season. So anything I'm going to say right now is not going to seem that nuts. Until it is that nuts, but it hasn't reached that point yet. So just remember, the Vikings have been crazier before. And here's everybody who's been out due to COVID.
And just remind him that it's like 2010, but the season hasn't had to have a game in Detroit moved, unfortunately, because of like the roof caving in.
Yeah, they haven't had 3 separate home stadiums yet. So from that standpoint, totally normal. They haven't had a Tuesday night game. Totally normal.
Yet.
Right. But they have had a close game against everybody they've played, except the Seahawks, who they stomped.
Wow. In retrospect, speaking of which, I don't know if you were paying attention, but the Seahawks are the new Super Bowl champions. And that is something that's worth noting because they beat San Francisco.
Right, which means that the Rams can beat them and that the Vikings can beat the Rams.
Yep, it's all coming up Millhouse. This is
we said.
Yep. There's
Like the prophecy foretold.
there is a way for this to work and be hilarious, and for the Vikings to keep it at the end of the year.
Can you imagine having the linear Super Bowl trophy not making it to the playoffs?
Nope.
Incredible. That's perfect preservation.
That's just how we're gonna work this week. Kyle Slade, and just for the record, I know there is a Reddit thing that exists from like the beginning of time through now. I'm aware of its existence. That is irrelevant because Packers fans were so insistent that the Vikings won their Super Bowl this year that we're going with this as the beginning.
That was the starting point.
This is the genesis of the Norse Code linear Super Bowl trophy. So there is a possibility this gets back to Minnesota eventually. Kyle Slaby asks, for a Reese therapy corner, the Vikings' ineptitude helped me get through a depressive episode. Is my enjoyment at their failure a healthy coping mechanism?
Well, it's consistently reliable, so in that way, yes, it is. Like actual talk, no, it's not. Please seek help. I care for you. But that is hilarious and rules. The fact that the Vikings can fail in such a way that makes you feel better about. Well, that's not really how depression works, but you know what I'm trying to get across.
Yes.
Situate yourself better. Great, fantastic. The world is stable. You can control what's around you. It's predictable. That's fantastic. You are now being grounded into a reality that you understand, can interact with, and have control over. The Vikings are bad. That puts you in a comfortable spot.
When we did the watch along on Zoom on Sunday, there were a number of us on camera, and my buddy DJ from Detroit, who's donated the show before, was on there, and was wearing his Detroit Lions, like he was the one Lions fan in the whole thing, and everyone was half hoping the Lions were going to win, but at the same time, we're like, come on, Vikings, don't do this. And I'm convinced...
Yeah, right. This would be funny, but also, what are you doing?
He had a cute dog up on the screen, too, which I think got sympathy, because he knows how to manipulate people and get the sympathy going. It was a good boy. And, everyone knew that this was coming, but nobody really expected that it actually was. Like, they knew it was possible. They knew it was possible the Lions were going to end up winning this. They just didn't want to believe that, come 3:30 on Sunday, that we'd be staring at the screen going, really? That's a thing? That this is reality? This is what we're doing? Just unbelievable. Good dog, though. From Kyle Slaby also, he asks, which stat is the least surprising? Adrian Peterson averaging 1.5 yards per carry on double-digit touches, or that Adrian Peterson had a fumble and a touchdown in his first game with Seattle?
The second one is the least surprising, although that first one is amazing. We were talking about this before the show. I looked up Adrian Peterson's stats this season. So he is averaging 16 yards a game on 11 attempts per game, which is amazing. And then also, if he keeps up that average, if he keeps up that 16 yards a game average, he will, in the 5 remaining games of the season, right? Because I think Seattle has 5 more games if I check. It is 14. Yeah. Then he will cross the 15,000 yard mark, which is disgusting. Just dribbling another 16 yards a game to get past the 15,000 yard mark. It's hilarious.
It is perfect. And when he is short by like 4 yards, we can all point to Brad Childress and be like, you are the reason this happened.
You did this. You did this.
You didn't let him break the record, and now look where we're at. I don't even think he would have come back this year if he would have broken the record.
Like in the
2012, in the 2012-2013 season.
Oh, okay, yeah. If he had just gotten like 2 more yards, yeah.
Yeah, if he would have got the record for most yards ever in a season for rushing,
his legacy would have been cemented and he would have come back.
No. Be like, you know what? I'm good.
I don't think so, because I think at least one of his comebacks was inspired by having to pay back debtors.
Okay, also very possible the man has a lot of kids. let's go to Beef Brewski, who asks, for a Reef's headhunting corner, assuming Zimmer goes after the season, how would you sell a rapidly aging, injury-prone team with cap issues to a prospective coach and or GM?
Point to Zimmer's contract length.
Ooh.
How long has he been in Minnesota? How many playoff games has he won? Come here, make money, be safe.
Bishop Sycamore alumnus asks for a Reef's nihilism corner. Does any of this even matter anymore?
Does mattering matter? What to you occurs if you find out that this has meaning to you? Is your life more fulfilled? I don't know. I would say that it not mattering is fine and that none of this matters, but that the idea of finding meaning is kind of tautologically doomed to failure of all things. Like tautological things don't tend to be false, but I think it's tautologically doomed to failure. You're always going to find yourself digging, and kind of letting go of this idea that things have to matter is fantastic. It allows you to find unknown beauty and unlock incredible amounts of creativity. This is me as a content creator, so maybe that's not great advice, but, mattering doesn't have to matter.
I'm enjoying that you're embracing the whole content creator thing as a result of this next question, oddly enough. This is from Kurt Marsh, who asks, afternoon, I honestly watch the games now so I can keep up with the podcast. My domestic partnership with the Vikings is at an all-time low. I thought a new TV would spice things up for us, but it's just not happening. How do I keep the fire alive when I'm putting in all of this time and effort just to be disappointed? Are my expectations too high, or am I not getting my needs met? Anything will help.
I can't imagine one could effectively argue that you're getting your needs met if you're watching Vikings games so you can keep up with a twice a week, although most recently once a week podcast, and then once every 2 weeks in the off-season podcast. I don't know.
All right, Arif, you're missing the scope of this. This is a relationship question.
It is a relationship question with the Vikings. I understand that, and that the new TV is like a let's call it a bedroom toy. I get the, but I was about to get there, and that's why I sighed, because that's the direction it went in. And I just want to make it clear how absurd it is that a Vikings podcast is not attempting to convince you to watch the Vikings, but has led you to watch more of the Vikings than you would have.
Here's my question.
I would say just consider an open relationship. Watch other teams.
You could do that, but if you really want to stick with Minnesota, have you tried watching the Vikings in other locations? Have you tried watching it in a bar and pretending that you don't, recognize the team? And you're just, what is this?
You can role play.
You can role play
public exhibition of the Vikings.
Exactly.
Literally exhibiting the Vikings. Yeah. Okay.
You can do that. There's options in order to do this.
Well, wait, how about have you tried a blindfold?
At one point, a paper bag was brought out during the Zoom watch along. I want to point that out. Oh, God. Let's go to Dylan, who asks, for a Reef's bread baking corner, why does my bread keep developing cracks? I made Japanese milk buns last week, and I made a bagel loaf today, and they both have the same problem with cracking. It seems like they rose too much or more than they were supposed to have risen in the oven.
All right, so we're going to put a link to Joshua Weissman's Japanese milk buns recipe, which I haven't tried yet, but look delicious. I absolutely do want to try it. Actually, yeah, we've still got our KitchenAid, so we'll probably do it sometime soon. So my first instinct when reading this question was that it is possible that the crust or the outer surface of the dough dried too early, and so it toughened up, which led to the cracks, which means that in order to maintain true oven spring, you might want to put a sheet of water underneath on a separate tray underneath the where you're baking. This is a pretty common technique to have steam in the oven in order to bake the bread. But there's all kinds of things. It could be that you're underproofing, which actually, you thought you might be overproofing. That's also a possibility, by the way. It could be that the temperature in the oven is a little bit too high, and so the outside is getting cooked faster than the inside, and then by the time the inside is cooked, it's steaming up and cracking the surface. Presumably, if you're making like Japanese milk buns and bagalos, you already know to make sure that you slice the surface so that there is room for expansion and stuff like that. But those are all things you have to consider. I will leave a link to a bread baking thing about bread constantly shattering or cracking in the oven in the show notes, because that's what people listen for.
That is part of your that is part of the content thing. Let's go to Tommy Gunn, who asks, for James's, I tried to make a funny on the internet and almost ruined my marriage corner. Every time I go to the fridge, the sour cream is front and center. On a scale of this is fine, dog, to look, a new episode of Forensics Files, how bad is this?
So like I'm curious about the front and center thing. Was it not there earlier and it now is? Like it was pushed there?
That would be the implication here.
Right. Yeah, I think you're in deep trouble. Okay, so the fact so one thing, she has been responding, right? Like she's been tweeting at us additional clarification, and every additional piece of clarification makes the question asker look way worse. Like, dude, you're really screwing this up. Every additional bit of context makes you look wrong. So, which is, I feel like how a lot of these work, but man,
it's been the story of my life, if nothing else.
We even asked if you had a separate mini fridge that you could put the sour cream in, and it turns out there is a separate mini fridge, and that's already where the Coke Zero goes. Like, why are we asking questions about Coke Zero in the last podcast? We've already got a dedicated space for the Coke Zero in the mini fridge. That it was like a false problem. The Coke Zero didn't need a place in the fridge because the sour cream took up all that space. Also, we learned how much sour cream you eat, which is quite a lot. Yeah, man, I think you're in trouble. I would try drawing faces on the sour cream container, just to
googly eyes. Yeah,
googly eyes, smiley face, just to let her know that you've appreciated the gesture she made in conceding to the 5-pound tub of sour cream, so that nobody forgets you have an open container of sour cream. Just to let you show your appreciation.
I mean, here's my suggestion. Have you tried role-playing with the sour cream situation?
Get a blindfold.
Go out to a bar. I don't recognize this situation of sour cream. This is what you get for asking relationship questions on this show. Don from Ohio asked, what will be the name of the new reality series Mike Zimmer and his girlfriend will be starring in? My guess is going to be Beauty and the Cyclops.
Oh God! Oh, that's good. Yeah, I can't beat that.
Nope.
Yeah, because now I can only think of names that kind of riff on the idea of Cyclops, and I don't think anything will beat Beauty and the Cyclops, because I was just like X-Men Origins Cyclops, and that's not nearly as funny. No. So, yeah, Beauty and the Cyclops, you win in one.
I don't often get a hole-in-one shot. I had to shoot it quick. James and I disagreed. This is also from Don. James and I also disagreed about the loss to Detroit being the worst in the Zimmer era. To me, it's because the stakes at play and losing to the team as we did. He thinks the Buffalo loss in 2018 is worse. I disagree, since it was early in the season and didn't have as much meeting. What does Arif think is worse?
So, James, what's your case?
My case is that the Buffalo loss was against a Josh Allen who at that particular moment was abysmal, was not a proven entity, was full on terrible for like most of that year.
And actually, by adjusted net yards per attempt, one of the worst passers in the modern football era.
It was a game that the Vikings were, it was supposed to be a slam dunk, and the Vikings were down 28-0 at halftime. This is the only game I've ever watched. Like, I watched the NFC Championship game against the Eagles and I survived. I didn't need to go for a walk immediately, but this was a game where I've said it on the show. I got up from where I was at. There were a bunch of kids in my apartment. I just got up. I don't even remember if I put shoes on, and I just walked I don't even know if I said goodbye to my girlfriend at that moment. I just knew I needed to get away from the kids so I could just start swearing. And I walked the 6 blocks over to the bar, and I walked up there, and the only thing that saved me was the fact that Adrian Peterson was destroying the Packers that day as a member of the Redskins. And I got to commiserate with a Packers fan and laugh at them for their troubles. That game was atrocious. That game was one of the dumbest moments in the entire Zimmer era. The hurdle by Josh Allen. And the only thing that possibly could sneak in here would be that loss to the Rams, where Anthony Barr was put in coverage, and we all learned that day that Anthony Barr should never be put in that sort of situation, ever. Ever.
Yeah, he shouldn't be covering receivers.
No. So that's my case for the 2018. This was bad. And this is likely going to be the thing that everybody points to when Zimmer's let go at the end of the year. But the Buffalo thing was worse on a few levels.
So I think the Buffalo thing was worse too. The spread in that game was I think 17.5, and the Vikings lost by 21, which means that versus the spread, they lost 37.5 points. That is one of the biggest losses versus the spread ever. Ever. In the history of football ever. We don't have that many double-digit spreads in the NFL, and when you have a double-digit spread, you don't lose by double digits. This is one of the worst losses in the history of football versus expectation. So yeah, it happened in week 3, right? So it is not as if the Vikings were carving a path where there was some precarity, right? Where they were in a playoff race where you didn't kind of really know what that result was going to be, right? But this is one of the worst losses by spread for a double-digit favorite in NFL history, right? The Vikings won against San Francisco. They tied against the Green Bay Packers. You didn't really know who they had. And then they got their doors blown off by Buffalo, followed up by that exact Rams game that we just talked about, that 2018 Rams game. And that one's the one where the Vikings had to dig themselves back into an 8-7-1, right? And so by expectation, the Vikings were expected to do more against this Bills team than they were against a winless Lions team. The Vikings were favored by 7, I think, in this point against the Lions on the road. And they lost by 2. So they lost by 9 points. So by expectation, the people's understanding of the Bills in that game versus the people's understanding of the Lions in that game, the Lions are bad, right? But remember in 2018, I was saying stuff like, hey, I never say this, but the Bills might actually lose to a college team. That's how little I think of their talent. I am one of those people that think it is annoying and stupid when people talk about, hey, what if we put this college team up against this NFL team? Because I think the worst NFL team typically blows out college teams. And we went through the offense, and the only offensive player that I thought was worth anything on that 2018 Bills team was Deion Dawkins. That's it. That Bills team was atrocious heading into that game. And that's why the Vikings were double-digit favorites. They were just coming off of that 2017 season where they had made an NFC championship game. It was the beginning of the Kirk Cousins era, right? So they signed Kirk Cousins in hopes to pair with a 2017 level defense so that they can win a Super Bowl, and then they lose to a 6-10 Bills team that should have been 5-11 because of this game, right? And the Bills' wins were unimpressive that year, aside obviously from the Vikings, right? Because their wins that year were against the Jaguars, the Lions, a really bad Titans team before the Titans were interesting, and a bad Dolphins team, right? And so it's only the Vikings that stands out as an inch because they beat the Jets, they beat the Jaguars, they beat the Dolphins, and they beat the Lions, right? Like they did not beat good teams that year to go 6-10, except for the Vikings. So that Bills loss I think is worse because it told us that it might not matter that you massively upgraded at quarterback, even though you just went to the NFC Championship game. Like I think that's the first realization that you had that the Vikings might not make it back. So I think that one was worse.
Well, let's go to the final question, which is oddly enough just a nice little thing from Don from Ohio. He says, after seeing Dusty O'Connell on the Norse Code watch along yesterday, I am convinced he has some sort of a Hutchinson-Gilford syndrome, otherwise known as the Benjamin Button disease. My question, should I get him a case of Capri Sun, or should I still get him a 100 count of Keurig coffee pods?
Well, as somebody who's actually seen Dusty when he's young, I can tell you he is aging just slower.
No. I'm
You disagree?
I'm starting to be of the belief that with Don here, because Dusty looks better now than he did in high school. Like he looks
he looks better now, but he had acne in high school, right?
Well, yes, but like he looks.
That's a young person thing.
Yeah, but he had acne when he was older too, and I'd say that to Dusty now. It's like that's a thing that's always existed. But like it is now to the point where I am genuinely disturbed that he's like slowly like he might look like a 20-year-old here in a couple of weeks. Whenever his birthday is. I'm a bad friend. It's near the.
We know you're a bad friend.
It's near the end of the month. I think it's like the 20th or something. But like, he's gonna be 40 and he's gonna look 20, and I'm just gonna go, yeah, that makes sense. Like he gets married next year, he's gonna look like a 16-year-old, and I'm gonna.
We're gonna have to ask some questions to his husband about.
So some questions are gonna have to be asked. Definitely the Capri Sun at that point, like or Boone's Farm. Either way, it's not right. It's definitely not right. Yeah, I'm starting to believe that Don might actually have a point here. Because every time Dusty gets on for webcam or whatever, it's getting there. All right, that's gonna be the end of this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We will be back next week to talk about hopefully a not terrible situation for a Thursday night game. But you never know, do you? Because the Vikings are not to be trusted. Reef, what do you have to plug? And don't mention your health insurance.
What? I don't have to plug my health insurance. That's taken care of by my employer. Anyway, in order to make my employer happy, you can subscribe to The Athletic at theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan. You can find articles. I've got a piece coming up this morning. Again, by the time most of you listen to this, it'll already be up. That breaks down that final drive for the Vikings and kind of what it might mean in a broader context. I've got another piece coming this week, which I actually forgot what it was about. So that's good. Good job, Arif. I'm going to have to talk to my editor about what I agreed to do. But that piece sounds like fun, whatever it was. So tune in for that. Otherwise, follow me on Twitter at ArifHassanNFL.
All right, that's going to be it for this show. Again, hope you guys have enjoyed it. We'll be back next week. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that the Vikings signed someone named Case Cookus this year. And we'll be back next week.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at ArifHassanNFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to NorseCode